Okay, so it's been a while since I've posted anything on the channel. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the world. I have some interesting things to discuss. Now, what we've seen with the Eight Nations Rugby Union, yes, this is something that I think could have a bearing on wider sport, is that the Fijian games that were scheduled to take place haven't because of coronavirus outbreaks within the Fijian squad. So this raises a question: can elite sport in Europe go on without shutting down again, considering that British Ice Hockey has had the news that they have been granted elite status, which means players can go back into training, players can get back into preparing for a season. We've seen some trial games take place at the National Ice Hockey League level, the NIHL, and they went very, very successfully. Go to rugby union, games are being called off and abandoned before being played because the Fijian squad has had a coronavirus outbreak. So one sport is allowed to return to training. At the same time, another sport is being affected quite heavily by players testing positive. And this, I was going to do a video on this: can elite sport avoid shutting down a second time? We've seen it in rugby league where a lot of games have been lost because teams have had players and coaching staff test positive in large numbers. So that's affected the Super League playoffs for the grand final and caused some rescheduling. We've seen rugby union with the Eight Nations affected, where Fiji haven't been able to fulfil any of the fixtures so far up to this point, because squad members in large numbers again have tested positive. Over the international break, football that we've just had, soccer if you're North American, again, players have tested positive whilst on international duty, which does raise the question: firstly, what biosecurity protocols are in place? Secondly, we're still having players and coaches test positive in these elite level sports. So you have to think to yourself, is it justifiable keeping these sports going? Thirdly, is it affordable to shut down? Considering that if you look at lower league football in the UK, for example, they stated that playing games in front of no fans is not financially viable. They said this when the play was restarted last season, and there were debates about whether League One and League Two would come back to play. And it was decided it wasn't financially viable to play games in front of no fans in attendance. So they didn't resume play. Playoffs went ahead, but the rest of the regular season didn't. The premise of restarting this season was fans will be in attendance at some point. The 1st of October came and went, and there were no fans in attendance. So the 1st of October has been and gone. That plan to bring fans back obviously didn't come to fruition. We're looking at as early as somewhere between January and March, most likely March, when fans are allowed back in. And now look at League One and League Two. They may not be able to make a payroll this weekend. They may not be able to pay their players and their non-playing staff at the end of this month. There are 10 clubs. Now, there could even be more that are struggling financially. The fact that League One and League Two openly said we cannot financially survive, we cannot resume play, and there was no universal plan by the FA, the EFL, and the Premier League back in March in order to financially safeguard teams, and the fact that Macclesfield have gone out of business in that time, and there is still no deal on the table that's been fully signed off yet, says there's a problem. Another interesting thought of note: the NHL hasn't come up with a return to play schedule as of yet, although players are returning from Europe to return to training camp. Some players have actually already been training for some time, be it with teams or without teams, and that's interesting. The interesting thing to note is the NHLPA and the NHL are at loggerheads over extending escrow payments and asking for further wage deferrals. We've seen this in a lot of sports. Pay cuts. Should the players take pay cuts? Should the players take wage deferrals, which means they will get paid that money, just not right now? The NHL and the NHLPA are currently having these discussions about restructuring the salary cap and the owners asking for more money back. And the escrow debate and the salary wage deferrals, players are already giving up about 25-30% of their wage packet. They agreed this at the last CBA extension, which is why we got play resumed and why we got a Stanley Cup awarded. The NHL is going for a 1st of January restart date, and that is admirable and that is fair. They are aiming to restart play on the 1st of the month, on the first day of the year. The AHL have already postponed their restart date by a further month. So they've got to leave themselves some flexibility. And this is where we go back to European elite sport, what we're seeing with Rugby Union and the Eight Nations. Now, Rugby Union has said we're not going to have any league campaigns, and that's fine. And they've rejigged the international calendar to get matches played. What would normally be the autumn internationals, because this is one of their big money makers. Conversely, look at the Premier League, look at Serie A, La Liga, the Bundesliga. Have these leagues allowed themselves enough flexibility, considering we've just had an international break, which a lot of people felt was unnecessary with the Nations League, and we've just had an international break and players are testing positive. If that leads to a shutdown of a league or matches being postponed, abandoned, cancelled, have the league authorities left themselves enough flexibility in order to get those games rearranged and played? That's something else. So, looking at sport this winter, in a normal sporting calendar, the Rugby Union Premiership would have already been into its 2nd month. The Premier League would have started a month earlier, so it would have been 3 months in rather than 2 months in. Yes, we would have had the international breaks. Rugby League would have already played the grand final. Obviously, the NRL has now had State of Origin, and they'll be preparing for next season. This will be their off season. Ice hockey would be in at the end of its 1st or 2nd month of the season, depending what country you're in and what league you watch. So the NHL would already be a month into the season, month and a half into the season, and we'll already be discussing some teams that probably won't make the playoffs, injuries, trades, free agency coming up. The NFL, that seemed to have carried on as normal. Major League Baseball would be deep into the off season right now. The NBA, again, would have already been a couple months into the season. Major League Soccer would have been done for the season. There's a lot of things that are different. But have these elite sports given themselves the flexibility to go through yet another shutdown? Because this is looking likely. Things are going to get worse before they get better. Could we see another shutdown in elite sport? That's something that I think needs to be considered, needs to be, thought about. And with some sports getting given that elite status to come back to training, so British ice hockey, which is a gate-driven league, it's great. They streamed those test games, which is great. They're a gate-driven league. Without fans in attendance, these teams cannot survive. Yes, they've been given government grants to ensure that costs can be met and players can get paid, and some government assistance, but they are a gate-driven league. Now, the sports will survive. It's just how many teams don't, I think, is what we're possibly looking at with the Elite League and the National League here in the UK. Other European leagues like the SHL, the Swedish National League, are going ahead. The KHL is going ahead. So other European leagues have forged ahead. Other leagues in Europe haven't. But being a gate-driven league, to play games without fans and without some kind of TV deal package or streaming package would be financially ruinous for the league. But it is interesting to note that, especially with European football, and I'm looking at this, the international break, those teams that are qualified for the Euros next year shouldn't have played any friendlies. Just putting it out there. The fact that players have tested positive during that period and have come back with positive tests. I mean, there was in the England-Ireland game, player test positive. A star player like Mo Salah testing positive. These are things that are going to be a nightmare for a coach or a manager who's lost a star player, in Mo Salah at Liverpool, for example. And there is a risk that more players could come back with positive tests, and then you have to shut games down. The Champions League, for example, there were question marks about having a condensed schedule for that, and have UEFA and the domestic FAs given enough flexibility for seasons to be completed. We had the same debate and question about the Bundesliga when it restarted first. Could it be shut down again and allowed to finish? And the thing is, there's a lack of flexibility with with how they went about it. They then had to shorten the off-season, shorten the transfer window, and squeeze things in, and then restart a month later. I don't think football has allowed itself the flexibility it needs if there is another shutdown or mass games postponed in which to reschedule games, where other sports have allowed a bit of flexibility in their start dates when they get going, and allowing time off to slot games in, to slot a game in. But it is interesting to know. You know, other sports have basically shut down completely. You know, and when you've got some sports, especially like ice hockey in North America with the NHL and the AHL, saying we're going to restart date by this point, and then the later they leave it, the shorter the season's going to be, and then you're having, I wouldn't say player unrest, but discussions between the players' union and the league about payment structures on salaries and wage deferrals. It raises questions. So it's an interesting time. On the other news, obviously Lewis Hamilton 7 world titles. You could argue that the F1 he's racing in is less competitive than other champions who won. Could argue that. You could argue with Ronnie O'Sullivan weighing in, saying, well, it is an uncompetitive championship in the sense that he's got the best equipment. Ronnie O'Sullivan said, if I was playing against an opponent but my pockets were bigger or I had better equipment rather than the standard snooker cue and same table, I wouldn't get any satisfaction from that. So Ronnie O'Sullivan has weighed in on the Lewis Hamilton being possibly put up for Sports Personality of the Year. He's mixed reviews online. And these are two very divisive characters in their own sports. People either love Ronnie O'Sullivan or hate him. People either love Lewis Hamilton or hate him. France have just beaten Scotland in the Eight Nations or the Nations Cup. Wow, Rangers are 11 points clear of Celtic in the SPL. I never thought I would say that again after considering where they were. Wow. There's a fair bit going on. But yes, so in the sports news, I think obviously with the Autumn Nations Cup or the Eight Nations, depending on how you want to see it, with the Fiji games basically not going ahead so far, is this a viable tournament? Does this tournament make any sense? Because Fiji are forfeiting games. So World Rugby have to obviously, think about. Let's have a look at the rugby union. So let's have a look. Autumn Nations Cup, Scotland, France. Being Ireland. Obviously, South Africa not taking part in the Tri Nations. That's something that's very, very well. The Rugby Championship, which is formerly the Tri Nations, because of lack of game preparation. Seven scores average access, point system. Right here. This is an interesting one. This is something I didn't really pick up on. But this is actually on the BBC Sport website. New Premiership Rugby points system for games impacted by COVID. So this is their flexibility in rugby union. The Premiership Rugby will no longer automatically award 5 points to teams when the opposition is unable to field a side because of COVID. League bosses confirmed a 4-point win will be awarded to the club able to name a side, with 2 points to the team forced to cancel. The score will be recorded as 0-0. With COVID, we previously had a system which effectively attributed fault. The problem we have is that it's very, very difficult in the current landscape. So that was something that somebody's done wrong. There was no science behind the new system, but it was the fairest way of dealing with the situation. On the final day of last season, Sale were unable to play because of positive test results, and their match with Worcester was eventually cancelled. The Warriors were given a 20-0 win, and 5 points as Sale missed out of the playoffs. And that was something that came out of last season. Under the new system, Worcester would have had 4 and Sale 2. If a club is unable to field a team for reasons not attributed to COVID problems, then the previous system of a 20-0 win with 5 points will continue. Due to fixture congestion, matches cannot be rearranged. So Rugby Union has not allowed itself the flexibility to rearrange games. That's the problem. This is where I think flexibility in sports leagues is very, very important. All fixtures during the regular season will be treated equally, with only the semi-finals and final given more leeway. I think that's wrong. I think they need more flexibility. The opening round of 6 fixtures will go ahead as planned, which they have. Stricter measures over breaching salary cap regulations. That's something interesting. Saracens were docked 35 points. Now they were relegated. Great. Independent government review. That was all that. Let's have a look. So yes, so rugby unions brought in a new point system for games that get cancelled because of the coronavirus. The thing is, even that system is very inflexible. The only time they're giving flexibility is when you're in the rugby union finals, and for me, that's a very inflexible process, which doesn't really allow for fixture rearrangement, and that's something that I think needs to be looked at. This is where I think European sport is not being flexible enough. I don't think there's the flexibility there. It seems to me that why is this popping up? I'm not interested. Go away. Oh, my computer's been slow. So the lack of flexibility by rugby union astounds me. It really does. Now, they have brought in a fairer system for points awarded for games not being able to take place. But I would have thought they would have had more flexibility apart from just 3 games a season. The final and the semi-finals for the Premiership. They've said fixture congestion. That is a head scratcher. I thought a flexibility would have been allowed to rearrange games. It has happened before where matches have been postponed and they have been rescheduled. What they're saying there is, don't fixture congestion, we're not going to do it. And that's part of the problem with starting a season late and not reducing the fixture list just to 1 game. You play your opponent once rather than twice. They're trying to do a full season fixture list, which is probably going to lead to more injuries for players and players not getting the rest and rotation that they need. Plus, they're doing this 8 nations thing, which I find is a head scratcher because clubs' best players on international probably going to get injured. And in Fiji's case, they've all caught COVID. So that lack of flexibility, I think, is a worry. And this is where leagues like the NHL and Major League Baseball found this out as well, with a whole host of games cancelled when they restarted, is a lack of flexibility ends up really causing problems. And the longer the NHL leaves their restart date, the more difficult the flexibility to reschedule games that are cancelled because of the coronavirus becomes. If there is and they're talking about having bubbles and security bubbles and biosecurity protocols and phasing crowds into the season. And that's great. You need to allow yourself flexibility. Very surprised by the RFU's decision and Premiership Rugby's decision to not allow that flexibility, especially after the Sale Worcester situation. And while there are changes and they are welcome, I don't think they allow that flexibility to work around the problem. Because what happened last season, it cost Sale a playoff berth. And if that was a relegation battle, that would be a huge argument. So that'll be interesting to see. Obviously, there's been a lot of debate about should the international football break gone ahead. There's a lot of talk about should Gareth Southgate remain England manager going forward. The Nations League and all that. Is it a good format? It is for the smaller teams, not necessarily for the bigger teams. Obviously, Scotland, qualifying for their first international tournament in 23 years, I think is the biggest news to take out of the football international break is Scotland's qualification for Euro 2021. That's big news. That's welcome news. It's something that I think has been quite concerning. I was debating about the struggles that Scottish football has had since 1998. And I remember watching Scotland in World Cup 98 and Euro 96, and they had a decent side back then. Something has happened in Scottish football over 2 decades, nearly 2.5 decades, for them to be languishing where they are, and the struggles that they've had, the amount of managers they've had, and the lack of player development, the lack of player, development, scouting, top quality players going to top quality teams. Scotland have finally done something. Now, we'll have to see what happens, next summer. Should the Euros actually go ahead as planned, which I believe they will in a bubble format. But the fact that they haven't had that tournament experience for so long, and that the other home nations have been more consistent in appearing in tournaments, and Scotland have lagged behind, as I say, in youth development, player development, producing class players. You could argue the Scottish league system is not the best. And now Rangers being 11 points ahead of Celtic, kind of shaken up the apple cart a little bit, considering that Aberdeen were the second team in Scotland for such a long time and didn't take that next step. Kilmarnock gave it a go, didn't take that next step. So Rangers under Gerrard have turned things around. Whether that's sustainable long term, because we were here before with Hearts being top of the table, won for half a season, and now look where they are. They've got relegated out the SPL the season later. So Scottish football is not as competitive as it should be. And we're not seeing that many good Scottish players burst onto the Premier League scene or the European scene like we were 20 odd years ago. So the debate about Scottish football and the financial viability of Scottish football, and people saying I should take Celtic and Rangers and put them in the English league system. That debate's been had long before Scotland were having problems qualifying for tournaments. They had that debate in the early 90s when the Premier League was set up in England. That debate's been had for nearly 30 years. You should take Rangers and Celtic, take them out of Scottish football and put them in English football. That would kill Scottish football. Stone dead. Absolutely kill it. Aberdeen and the Edinburgh clubs and Motherwell, the Dundee clubs, I don't think can drag Scottish football. A, make the money. B, create the fan interest. If you take the two most successful clubs out of one league system and transplant them in another, it would kill the domestic game in Scotland. So for all those arguing, I should just transplant them in. Firstly, the level of football being played in Scotland is not on the same level as being played week in, week out in England. Secondly, the finances. I mean, Christ, the away days would be an absolute nightmare. And yes, Rangers and Celtic are global brands in that sense, where they are well known abroad. They are the two best known Scottish clubs outside of Scotland by the international fan base. But that would be just ridiculous because they would get pumped. They would mid-table teams at best in the Championship. They really would. They would actually honestly breach financial fair play rules just to compete in the Premier League and put a squad together that could survive in the Premier League. They would need to have extremely wealthy owners, and then they'll breach financial fair play rules, which we know are flawed anyway. But it is what it is. But we'll see what happens. So, any questions for anything? This is the thing. We've obviously seen Dustin Johnson win the Masters. And I think that was an underwhelming Masters in a sense that, so no fans being there, it's completely different. And I think it went under the radar in the news in this country, at least, that the Masters was on. I know it didn't seem to be on the radar of many people with the Masters. And golf hasn't really been on the radar for a lot of sports that have returned. It's been quite in the background with sports returning. Golf has, and it's Dustin Johnson winning. He's a great player. No debating that. He's an exceptionally talented player. Really is. But I think that was the most, I wouldn't say underwhelming because obviously he played very, very well. But I don't think without the fans there and without that last day drama and you know, playoff, you know, if they were tied after four days of golf and to go around and it's like knockout golf, I think because of the lack of fans there was just a lack of atmosphere and a lack of something going on. It didn't really register in my mind that the Masters is taking place. And I like the Masters. I think that's the most testing golf tournament there is, bar the Open. The Open and the Masters are the two, I think, in my mind, the two toughest golf tournaments and the two joint equal toughest majors on the golf circuit. That's my opinion. I think the Augusta National and the Open, where it rotates around golf courses. So there's each year the Open's different. You go to a different course. You go to a different, location, and the Masters, where they tend to change the course layout slightly and tinker with and make some modifications to various. Let's say this par 5 gets tinkered to make it a par 6, or this par 4 is turned to a par 5, or this par 3, the approach to the green is different. They make some tinkering efforts. But if I look at it, and I look at the Masters and then the Open, it'd be interesting to do a video on the history of winners who've won more than one in the last, let's say, 30 years. Let's have a look at my lifetime from 89 till now. Who's won the Masters and who's won the Open, and see if there's any correlation between someone winning both in the same year. That would be really interesting. That's something I haven't thought of before, is looking at Masters wins versus Open wins. If someone's won X amount of Masters and X amount of Open wins, that'd be very, very interesting, because Tiger Woods, I think, comes up on there quite a few times. But apart from Tiger Woods, it'd be very interesting to see how players do in the Masters and how players do in the Open. That'd be very, very interesting. Also, look at it when it comes to World Cup tournaments, whether teams do better in the Northern Hemisphere or Southern Hemisphere in their final positioning, or whether an individual athlete at an Olympic Games does better in the Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere, that kind of um, divide. That'd be kind of very, very interesting to look at. What is also interesting to notice, no Winter Olympics has ever taken place in the Southern Hemisphere. That's something that a lot of people don't realise, is there's been no Winter Olympic Games in the Southern Hemisphere. It's an interesting one. And looking at how teams do in let's say, Football World Cups, Northern Hemisphere versus Southern Hemisphere competition. So let's say we'll look at South American World Cups and the South African World Cup, how South American and Southern Hemisphere teams did in those tournaments versus Northern Hemisphere teams, and vice versa. When you look at the European World Cups that we've had and North American World Cups we've had, how teams from South America, for example, performed in the Northern Hemisphere. Now, in USA 94, obviously Brazil won the tournament, but for most European World Cups, it's a European winner. And you look at, say, Brazil, for example, 1970, it was held in Mexico. Brazil win. Brazil don't win again until 1994. It's very interesting. They won in Sweden in 58. They won in Chile in 62. They win in Mexico in 1970. And then they don't win again until 94 in USA. And then after that, they don't win until 2002 in Japan and Korea. So Brazil is an interesting one because they won in North and Southern Hemisphere-based competitions when it comes to World Cups. But what is most interesting is you have to. That's an interesting one. I predicted that the 4 semi-finalists in the Russia 2018 World Cup would be European-based teams. I said the South American teams wouldn't get past the quarter-final stage, and I was proven right. Not a single South American team got past the quarter-final stage in that tournament. So it'll be interesting to look at Qatar in 2022. Plus, it's going to be played at a different time of year. Plus, obviously, we now have this very condensed schedule for, the Euros next year when it should be played this year. We should be discussing the Euros this summer and how the home nations would have done, how the other European nations have done, the pan-European tournament, all the different locations, how the travel would affect teams. And that can still be a debating point next summer. That travel will affect teams, and there will be an impact with different time zones and different microclimates across Europe and the bubble situation. It's going to be interesting to see how the Euros takes place next year and how playing across a whole continent affects players and affects in a short space of time. But these are players who play Champions League and Europa League football, who are used to European travel, used to 2 games a week, 3 games a week. When you've got a European season where you're playing in the midweek game, then you're playing on the Saturday or the Sunday, depending when you played in the week, and then you're playing again, let's say, if you've got a second leg a couple of weeks later. They are used to it. But it'll be interesting to see how it works on a pan-European scale. Look at the Russia World Cup. There was a lot of travel distance there. There was a lot of time zones. There was, I think, 3 or 4 different time zones required for the Russia World Cup. There was a lot of distance, long-haul flights and bus journeys for teams. So that had an impact. And the team that adapted best was the French. They adapted best to the travel. They adapted best to the temperatures and the weather conditions. They adapted best to, recuperating after travel and games. They were the best adapted team to dealing with a very vast country playing. And it was actually bigger than the surface area of Brazil that they played 4 years previously. They adapted very, very well. Other teams, not so much. Some teams didn't adapt well to the travel, and it showed on the pitch when they were starting to struggle, with fatigue. After about 55, 60 minutes, some teams were looking out on their feet because the travel had an impact. It will be interesting to see how the Euros affects that, with training bases, hub cities. Are certain groups going to be in certain cities before we get to the knockout stages? It's going to be interesting. And then you look at, the Rugby Union World Cup, last year, which we had. That was a really brilliant tournament in Japan. It was a brilliant tournament. And I think it was the Japanese really put on a great show. There was only one game, I think, that couldn't take place because of the typhoon. They tried to get it on. but it didn't happen. And I think that's the first time at a Rugby Union World Cup that a match has had to be called a draw because of the weather and hasn't taken place. Brilliant tournament, which gave me a lot of hope for the Olympics, which should have taken place this summer. And I still have that hope for the Olympics, but I look back at the 2002 Football World Cup, and again, Japan and Korea did a very, very good job. The organisation there was brilliant. I mean, the Rugby World Cup, I mean, okay, some teams didn't quite perform at the level that they possibly should have. And we can debate whether that's right or wrong. And you know, South Africa obviously losing to the All Blacks in the group stage, but beat the All Blacks. So they built themselves into a tournament, and they didn't necessarily play the most attractive rugby at times, but they built themselves into that tournament and made sure that they got themselves over the line, and they turned up in the big game. And if you look at South Africa's record in World Cup finals, they've won them all. South Africa make it to a World Cup final in rugby union, they're going to win. Yeah, they have a very, very scary record in World Cup finals. Every World Cup final they've made, they've won. That's the generally terrifying thing with South Africa. Whether you can go the All Blacks, the greatest, you know, New Zealand, the greatest rugby union nation when it comes to international rugby of all time, with the All Blacks, you can look at their win percentage and go, yeah, it's in the 80% range all time. But then you look at World Cup wins and finals appearances. South Africa have 100% when they make the World Cup final. No other team can say they can do that. Every other team that has made the World Cup final has either won or lost or lost. South Africa have won every single World Cup final appearance. That's something that I think again is a little known fact. They didn't even appear in the first two World Cups because of apartheid and the political situation, and they were in the political sporting wilderness. 95 was their first Rugby Union World Cup, and they won it. So yeah, you could definitely look at South African rugby and go, well, they generally do all right every 12 years. It's 12 years between, you know, World Cup finals appearances, and they generally win them. Just generally. It seems to be a 12-year cycle with it actually is every 12 years. Well, here's the thing: when it comes to rugby union, South Africa gets to the final every 12 years and win. Every 12 years, South Africa win a World Cup. So there'll be two World Cups where they're not quite as good, and they build every third World Cup cycle they win. It's bizarre. I've looked at it. 95, 2007, and 2019 is 12 years in between each World Cup win. It is really bizarre. It's a strange bit of what I describe as a really odd thing that every 12 years they actually seem to have a cycle where they win and build again and they win and then they build again. It's a very, very interesting cycle. The snooker, I mean, I would try. I mean, there's a lot going on outside of YouTube and outside of work in family situation, which I will mention, I think, in a separate video in the coming weeks. There's a lot going on that needs to be sorted out, and that means there is less channel input and output in the next coming weeks. There's a lot of other things that are out, sort of inside my control, but outside of my control. I will try and obviously watch where I can, what I can. I think on the snooker side of things, it's a sport that I fall in and out of love with. I do fall in and out of love with snooker, and I think Ronnie O'Sullivan, with his comments about Lewis Hamilton this week, have sparked a furious debate about one sportsman discussing another sportsman's success or failure in a different sport. Yes, Lewis Hamilton's won 7 world titles, and that's amazing. It's great. He's also racing in a car that's far more competitive than every other car on the grid, including his teammates, because he gets preferential treatment when it comes to spare parts and design modifications. Bottas is not a bad driver. He's proven he can win races. He's proven he can be on the podium and win points and lift silverware. Hamilton, if you notice, when he first went to McLaren, he nearly won the world title in his first year, wins it in his second year. Raikkonen wins in 2007. Then 2008 he wins his first title, and that's everyone's really, really happy and all that, and that's great. Then he goes through a down spell where the car isn't as successful, and he really isn't. He's shown up to be a less, I'm not saying lesser driver, but he's having to compete. He's having to fight a bit more in the middle of the pack, and then suddenly Mercedes sign him after Button wins with the Brawn team, which is basically the foundation of the Mercedes team. So his ex-McLaren team, his future McLaren teammate, wins with the Brawn team, goes to McLaren. They have a couple of years together. Then Button retires, and Hamilton moves on to to Mercedes. And for the first year or so he's at Mercedes, the car isn't great, and then it starts winning. I think when it comes to England winning once and never winning again, um, yeah, there's an interesting one there, isn't it? We've England or Great Britain, because I think I class Great Britain in some sports. We've won Olympic gold in ice hockey once, never again. Back in 1936, we've won a couple of silver and bronze medals in there, but we won it once, never again. Best Olympic ice hockey team in 1936. Football World Cup in '66. Rugby Union World Cup 2003. Cricket World Cup, obviously, 2019. And then Rugby League World Cup, we've never won. I don't believe. I think we haven't. I could be wrong, but I don't think we've ever won that. And yeah, it starts to. I think field hockey, we've been, I think, the most successful team. I think it's actually field hockey. I think. But the Six Nations, you look at the Six Nations Rugby Union, England won that quite a bit. They've also lost it quite a bit as well. If you look at their win-loss record, when it comes to the Six Nations, what was the Five Nations, which used to be the Four Nations, before France joined in the early 1900s and Italy joined in 2000. You look at England's record in the Six Nations, they've won a lot of games. They've also lost the most amount of games, ironically. The Home Nations football tournament, England were crap in the 70s. I think what is interesting is all these World Cup wins and Olympic medal wins in the team sports or World Championship wins or appearances, you have a group of players that peak at the same time. To be a successful team, you have to build for a long period of time. Look at South Africa, 12 years apart. So Africa won't win the Rugby Union World Cup again until I'm 42, I should be, or 41, I think I should be when South Africa win the World Cup again in Rugby Union. If we're going by the 12-year cycle that South Africa seems to do, they seem to win. Then they go through a down phase, and then they slowly build up, and they go through a down phase again, and they go up. So after 8 years, they've got decent in the World Cup, haven't quite got over the line. They're still figuring out, and then by the end of it, bang! In the third time round, they win the tournament. But you look at the team sports, it is very cyclical. I mean, Tampa Bay Lightning went, I think, is it 15 years? 16 years in between Stanley Cup wins. I think I would class it as 15 years if you take the lost season out, 2004, 2005. You know, the Tampa Bay Lightning in the NHL just won the Stanley Cup again for the second time. There was a huge, period of time where they didn't win. They got to a couple of Stanley Cup finals in there and conference finals in there and fell short, but they got there in the end. You look at the Islanders, for example. They win 4 Stanley Cups in the early 80s, and this is their longest playoff run they've had since 1984. So again, it's a cyclical thing. Sometimes it's more than that. It's sometimes, yes, you can have a good group of players come through the class of '92 at Manchester United, and they all come through at the same time. That begins a decade and a half of dominance for Man United English football because they had a good core young players come through at the same time that made the first team straight out of the gate in 1992. And for various points in that successful run that Man United had, even up to the time that Ryan Giggs retired from playing, all of them contributed to trophies that Man United won. They left over time, and Ryan Giggs and Gary Neville were the last two left, and Ryan Giggs was the last one playing and still contributing to the team. These were the key core group of Manchester United under Alex Ferguson was the class of '92. Without the class of '92, Man United do not dominate English football in the '90s and the early 2000s. It doesn't happen. It'd be harder for them to win as many trophies. They would have won trophies, just not as much. Same with Liverpool, or in the '70s and '80s, core of players. They kept developing a good core of players and adding to that core, and not allowing that core to disintegrate. So when the core aged a bit, they had a couple more players to that key core of the team, and you have the other players around that come in and out, but you have that core. With the England World Cup win in 2003 in the Rugby World Cup, that core of players have been together, some of them for up to 8 years, winning and losing, playing in what was the Five Nations, which became the Six Nations, winning and losing in that tournament, winning and losing in World Cup games. They were at the '99 World Cup when South Africa dismantled them in the quarter final. There were players there at that World Cup who lost that quarter final, who went on to win 4 years later with the same coach, Clive Woodward. What normally tends to happen when teams lose in a final or a big knockout game is, it's got to be the coach's fault, and they don't stick and have faith with the program. They don't stick and have faith with the program. And that's part of the problem. Sometimes you have to learn the hard lessons with the coach as well. Manchester United, and I will say this, and Arsenal as well with Wenger, are prime examples of coaches that should have been sacked if you're looking at other clubs, but weren't, kept on, and then they got success. Wenger, towards the end, he wins 3 more FA Cups, which, quite frankly, with how Arsenal played in the league, shouldn't have had. They should not have had any silverware in the second half of Wenger's reign, but they did, partly because of his coaching. Manchester United, in the early Fergie years, wanted to sack him more than one occasion. The first 3 seasons, he nearly got sacked 5 times. The ownership of both clubs went, we'll stick with this guy long term. The problem with Arsenal is, yes, their transfer policy has been a bit hopeless, very hopeless. But ironically, they won 3 FA Cups under Wenger post 2006. The second half of his reign, he still won silverware. And then after the 2 years after he leaves, Arteta wins them another FA Cup. So with the same basically group of players with a few additions, Unai Emery notwithstanding, that Wenger had left them a couple of years before. Ferguson, same debate. He had a core of players that saved him his job, but then made him the most successful manager in European, I think, club history, in my view. The amount of trophies he suddenly won, especially in British football history, you cannot deny that. Since he's left Manchester United, yes, Van Gaal, Mourinho, they've won a bit of silverware, but the wheels have come off quite considerably. You can clearly see there is a decline in that team. Part of that is with player recruitment and what happens off the field. There's a reason why some teams are only successful for a very short period of time, and a lot of it is to do with the off field. It's not what happens on the field. There's a reason why Leicester are still a top 6 team. It's their off field, they've got it right. The on field, they've got it right. The coaching setup is right. The core of players they have together is correct. The team mentality is correct. But there's a lot of it happens off the field. You look at clubs like Newcastle. In the late 90s, they could have won the Premier League and 2 FA Cups. They came up a bit short, just a bit short. But that was their peak point. Then the off-field dramas start. Look at the team now. There's a lot of off-field drama with Newcastle United. And 20 years ago, they were one of the best teams in the country. They were, I think, the 6th most valuable football club in the world in 1999, 2000. They're not now. And a lot of that is to do with off-field drama. Lack of stable ownership is one thing. But at the same time, recruitment of off-field or backroom staff, as well as the playing staff and the playing roster, is exceptionally important. This is where you look at my 2 favourite sports are rugby league and ice hockey. And I look at successful teams on the field, on the ice, and I look how successful they are off the ice. And there is a really interesting thing to look at. Backroom stability is as important as the team stability on the field, on the ice. So I look at rugby league. The way that the Parramatta Eels have turned themselves around after their salary cap breach, they've got a stable backroom office, they've got a stable front office, they've got a stable board now, they've got stability off the field. Plus, they've also got a pretty good squad on the field. The Penrith Panthers, there were talks of turmoil several years ago. They've got a great youth system, which is bringing through basically their entire grand final lineup, have all played together since they were kids. And now, stable off-field, stable on-field, consistent selections, bang. The Melbourne Storm, okay, you could debate about the salary cap breaches, but they've basically had good recruitment for 20 years. They keep winning. Whether you like the Melbourne Storm or not, if you're a rugby league fan in the NRL, they keep winning. Teams that are less successful, now Cronulla obviously won a grand final in recent years, their off-field dramas are well documented, harming the team. The Canterbury Bulldogs, off-field dramas harming the team. The Brisbane Broncos have decided going to melt down this year, and look where the team were on the field, harming the team. The disaster that was Anthony Seibold, the disaster that was the off-field drama, the prolonged, protracted appointment of a new coach in Kevin Walters. The Brisbane Broncos get their first wooden spoon. Whereas last year they were a finals team and they scraped into the top 8. But they massively just fell off a cliff after round 3. Massively. The Bulldogs, chaos in the boardroom, lack of funds to construct a team with giving out. They've got to make a league minimum salary cap, so the league base. So they have to give out some contracts to reach the salary cap floor. But the team they could put together is inferior to 14 other teams. Only the Broncos were they better than this season. That tells you something, that they were only better than one other team this season, and that's the Brisbane Broncos. And the Broncos were literally a complete and utter dumpster fire from round 3 all the way through. The first 2 rounds were a mirage because they brought in rule changes during the break. NHL, the Islanders have been a shambles of a franchise since the early 90s, I'm going to say, because they were still pretty solid in the 80s. They were a mess off the ice. They've had arena issues, they've had ownership problems, dwindling attendance, even though they're a highly successful team historically. Starting to turn around, stability off the ice, stability in the office, the front office, the back office, the coaching setup, the core of players now. Problem solved. You would think. New arena being built, there's stability there. The Hurricanes, Carolina Hurricanes. Yes, they won a Stanley Cup in there. They've had a couple of conference final appearances. They got moved from Hartford for a reason. There was ownership issues. There was issues with finance, issues with attendance. Their building they were playing wasn't great. They got moved to Carolina. And there's some good players that have played there. They've won a Stanley Cup, as I say. But their lack of playoff success, troubling. Long periods without making the playoffs. Not a consistent playoff performer in the 90s and 2000s. It just hasn't happened. Yet they've somehow won a Stanley Cup. Now got new ownership, new direction. Guess what? Consistent playoff appearances. Arizona, formerly Phoenix, rebranded, had to move from Winnipeg originally in '96. Again, money issues. Not because the team wasn't great. To be fair, the team was pretty solid up in Canada. It was the lack of money and a weakening Canadian dollar, which meant that it was harder to sign free agents and players for the same money because you're actually technically paying more in wages. So for financial reasons, they will move to a new location. The issue they've had in Arizona is the lack of playoff success. Well, they made playoffs this year, which is a positive sign. Money issues, arena issues. They've had no stable arena. They've moved a few times, and there have been money problems. Again, new ownership coming in, the corner being turned, changes being made in the back and front office. On the ice, the team has improved. They had a shocking start to the season a couple of years ago where they just had the longest losing streak I think I've ever seen. Turned it around, didn't finish bottom of the league that year. It's weird, though, isn't it? Buffalo is another team. Haven't made the playoffs for a decade. They've got a loyal fan base. So when fans are allowed back in, they will constantly sell out that arena. The team is useless on the ice. They cannot put a team together that can win. But then you look at the constant chopping and changing behind the bench. There's no consistency. And questions have been pointed at ownership going, do you know what you're doing? The team has been mediocre for a long time. A lot of that is to do with player recruitment, coaching, and how the structures are set up. And then you go to Vancouver. They're a team that have their ups and downs. And it's Edmonton, Calgary. The Western Canadian teams have been up and down. The Atlanta Thrashers got moved to Winnipeg, my team, not because the players weren't putting the effort in, and not because fans weren't turning up. Shocking ownership, lack of playoffs, and the lack of a building, for a better word. By the end, they didn't even have a building to play in when they were moved. Now, regular playoff performers, making playoff appearances, stable finances, regularly sell out the building, well-run team. It's amazing how much can change just by having stability. The team, the Florida Panthers underwhelm as a team, but they actually have got good ownership. They've got some very, very good deals with their building arrangement. It's in a poor location, but the least they've got. They have a very stable owner, and they're starting to turn things around, but they do struggle to draw fans, and they're not a very successful team. Could that change going forward? Yes. I look at football, and I say this, clubs that constantly sack the manager rarely are successful. Chelsea notwithstanding, and Real Madrid and Barcelona, who like changing managers on a regular, frequent basis, notwithstanding, you look at it, and a team that regularly goes, oh, this manager's not doing it, we're going to sack, replace him, either get relegated or they're very mediocre and can't build anything. This is where you look at the Eddie Jones, you look at Sir Clive Woodward in rugby union, and they've signed contract extensions in the. Clive Woodward was in charge in the '99 World Cup, where England were dismantled by De Beers drop goals and that South African side that were semi-finalists. Dismantled, utterly dismantled. Right? There's no two ways about it. They were ripped to shreds in that quarter final. 4 years later, they're world champions. They stuck with the coach, they stuck with the process, they developed the core of players, brought new players into that squad. I mean, Sir Clive Woodward was the coach when England suffered their record defeat against Australia, when Wilkinson and Dawson debuted as the scrum half, fly half combination. I think it was like 79-0. Record defeat, I think, in 1997, 1998, that England suffered on their tour down under. And this is at a time when Australian rugby union was actually at the top. This was Australia were equal to the All Blacks, if not better. They could regularly beat the All Blacks. All Blacks and the Wallabies would have the Bledisloe Cup was legendary at this point. South Africa were giving a good crack as well. The Tri Nations was far more competitive than what became the Six Nations, the Five Nations, and the Southern Hemisphere teams were far superior to the Northern Hemisphere teams. That's no longer the case, but record defeat for England. I think that was Sir Clive Woodward's, first year in charge of the squad. Within 6 years, World Cup champions, beating that same Australian side that had Larkham and Gregan and others in there as their core leadership players, and the 9-10, beating that same Australian side within 6 years. They turned around a 79-0 deficit into a tightly fought World Cup final that went down to basically a drop goal, and they won. So that's the importance. I think that's something to note, is sticking with a coach and working with a process, and knowing there's going to be some pains along the way. Success doesn't come overnight, pays dividends. What we see now in a lot of modern sport is after 6 months it's not working, out the door, get someone else in, and it just becomes an expensive cycle of failure. So I'd be interested to see if Mourinho and Tottenham can continue their good start to the season. It'd be interesting to see if Leicester can continue their start to the season, and if Man United can continue to pick up wins and climb up the table. I think it's going to be a far more competitive Premier League this season than last season. I think the restart and the shortened transfer window off season, the condensed season we're going to have, I think it's going to have a bearing. I think squad rotation, injuries, suspensions are going to have more of a bearing this season than in previous seasons. So it'll be interesting to see how fresh the players are come the Euros, and how worn out teams are, and how players are going to have to be rotated, because there's a lot of injuries already right now. But the Jurgen Klopp thing, I mean, he didn't. It took a while. He's now winning trophies. Guardiola at Man City, it didn't happen overnight. But Man City as an entity since 2007, it took till 2011 for them. 2010, was it 2011? I think it was 2011 for Man City to first win trophies under the current ownership. It took 4 or 5 years for them to finally take that next step. Otherwise, it was going to be seen as an expensive failure. And they had a lot of missteps along the way. And I think Man City have peaked as a team. And I don't think they're going to be as successful long term than what was envisaged when the Sheikh Mansour takeover took place back in 2007. And it took a long time to get to where Man City are now. It didn't happen overnight. What's happening? We've got some notifications. What's the notification? Okay, so the Man City story and the Man City saga didn't happen overnight. It took time. It took a lot of time for it to work. The Chelsea one, on the other hand, with Abramovich, did pretty much happen quite quickly. The interesting thing was that first season, the squad was already in place. There was already a good core of players in John Terry, for example, already at the club, and then they just built and have been pretty consistent in being there or thereabouts since 2003. Nearly 20 years now, Abramovich has owned Chelsea. Nearly. It's been nearly 20 years of Abramovich's ownership at Chelsea. And you look at the amount of trophies Chelsea have won since Abramovich took over as owner. I believe it was 2003. It might have been 2004. It's been the best part of 2 decades that Abramovich has owned that club. Now, how long-term that success can be and how it can be maintained post-Abramovich is going to be very, very interesting. But that's an interesting one. It's going to be very interesting to see how long-term the Chelsea trophy machine, because it is, can consistently compete for silverware. On the side of Man City, again, it's going to be interesting to see how long they can consistently compete for trophies under the Sheikh Mansour ownership long-term. Because it seems they have peaked under Guardiola, and it seems that they could be on a downswing. It really does. How long can their competitiveness for trophies be sustained? They've won a fair bit since 2011. How long can they sustain this for the next decade? So in 9 years, they've won a lot of trophies, but how long can it be sustained? How long can that success be maintained? Because look with Man United, it was a good 2 decades solid of silverware. But for the previous 2 decades, they couldn't win jack. They won a few trophies here or there in the FA Cup and the League Cup, but for the most part, Man United were pretty average for a um, long time. Let's just show you. Let's show that. I think the international break, and I started the stream of this. There was a big. It's very divisive, okay? Because I was planning to do a video on will elite sport shut down because of COVID for a second time, and could it afford to shut down? But I'd rather do it in the live stream. I'm not really following the Premier League. My team plays in the Championship, and I haven't really followed the Premier League for a while now. Really religiously, I'm I'm not really. I've sort of gone off football quite a bit over the last couple of years. I mean, I enjoyed the World Cup in 2018, and I still obviously dip the toe in and watch FA Cup games if I can, and league games if they're available, and you know, don't get me wrong, I still enjoy football. I just don't enjoy it as much as I did. If you would have this debate with me in 2010, you would have the debate with me in 2010 about football. I was watching it religiously. If I could watch a game, I'd watch a game. And most of it would be Champions League and Europa League because it was on free to air. It was accessible. They put it all behind a paywall. I've got to find illegal streams, which I can't be bothered with because at least the virus is on the laptop. Try and, if I can, catch games on at mates' houses if they've got Sky Sports, BT Sport, or Premier Sport, and that's something that you have to like. Kind of, do you mind if I watch a game? Do you mind? Now, come February, the situation for me domestically changes. I'm moving again, and I'm moving back into my mum's house, and she has Sky Sports, so I'll be able to watch a little bit more of certain games. The interesting thing is, yes, he's played in the international break. He's played a big part of England's last couple of games. Could this be the manager going, right, you played some international football, which is a different kettle of fish to league football. We've got to think of the long plan. We're rotating the squad, which is, I think, going to happen a lot more this season with teams. They're going to have to rotate players, bring the youth players in, work with whatever biosecurity protocols put in place. People are saying, oh, Foden should get more games at City. Well, obviously he's showing enough to get selected by England, and you can debate Southgate being the right guy in charge of England or not. And to be honest, beating Iceland 4-0, considering where we were in was it 2016, where Iceland embarrassed England at the Euros. Considering where England were 4.5 years ago against the same opposition and losing to where we are now, I think that's a positive. The Nations League concept, it does suit the smaller teams, the smaller nations, because they get to play against the teams of the same sort of level. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Look at the San Marino. Their first time in their history, they've drawn 2 games in a row and not conceded any goals. And people are going, saying San Marino. Well, actually, to these guys, these are part-timers. They've got full-time jobs. They give up work hours to play for their country. And one of their players, Rossi, I believe his name was in tears in the post-match interview. He was crying. The Gibraltar game, okay, Gibraltar and San Marino are basically the same level. Liechtenstein are a level above San Marino because their best players play in the Swiss domestic league, which is of a higher standard than what the San Marino players are, and they are full-timers. But the fact that they played back-to-back draws out and not conceding any goals is a historical moment for them. That's the positive side of the Nations League. The negative side of the Nations League is you're playing unnecessary internationals when all you should really be playing are qualification games and tournament games. That's it. Get rid of the friendlies, get rid of the Nations League, just play qualification games and your international tournaments for the big teams. I think the smaller nations that are on the lower ebb, I can understand the format working, but now you basically played a lot of unnecessary international matches where you put these players at risk of catching the virus, which players have, and that includes Mo Salah for Egypt. The debate about, well, it was a dead rubber, was it necessary? players testing positive out of the Ireland game and out of Egypt squad, it does raise questions about the biosecurity protocols in place. Considering that Foden obviously has breached the biosecurity protocols when we were in Iceland a few weeks ago. I don't know. People are saying what's Foden's best position? He's still a young player. Some players don't nail down their position or their role straight away. Is he exceptionally skilled? Yes. But there could be other reasons why Guardiola isn't playing him as much, and why Southgate obviously is being sent home from camp, and why Southgate, obviously sees something in the international side. This is something that I will know. Okay, in other sports, I've seen this in other sports where players at club level are pretty average, but you put them in a representative jersey, be it state of origin in rugby league or international level, and suddenly their stats change and their style of play changes. You'll see this in ice hockey, rugby league, and rugby union. Players may be pretty just average at club level, and then you see them play at international level or representative squads, because you will have barbarians and prime ministers, 11s and 13s and 15s and all that on touring matches, and suddenly out of nowhere these are superstar players. They can turn it on, and vice versa. There's players that play at international level that really underwhelm, but at club level they are superstars and they really perform really well because the tactics, the players they're playing with, the management's different, the environment's different. They perform better with the weekly grind rather than at isolated camps where you're only with your international teammates for a couple of weeks at a time. On the Foden side of things, there's a reason why Pep isn't playing. Now, Pep Guardiola, you can debate whether he's a good or bad manager, or whether he's, he develops young players as well as he used to at Barcelona and Bayern Munich, which he has done in the past, and whether the Man City thing, he's got a blank check. Is he? There's something going on with player and manager. There's clearly he's contracted to the club, so selling him, with him not playing as many minutes as he would like, it does make it more difficult when you're in a subdued transfer market, where you should be in a subdued transfer market. And he is an academy product, which is something that the Man City owners, obviously, when they bought the club, promised that there would be this mass academy influx of players, and it hasn't actually happened. And now you have an academy player making the first team at Man City, or being the first team squad. It suddenly changes things. I don't think Foden will actually leave Man City this season, but I think long term, the question has to be had: where would he be better suited leaving and playing at another club? And that's something where there's something going on at Man City between manager and player. For a player that talented, who should have played more games, and this debate's been had by a lot of players, actually, about a lot of players about should they have played more, should they have played less. Would another manager get something different out of him? Would he have a better relationship with another manager? And you could put Foden into the other 19 Premier League sides and he would start every game. Simple. I think Henderson as goalkeeper. Should have stayed at Sheffield United. I'm surprised they didn't sign him full time, because the only reason why he's gone back to Man United is Sergio Romero has moved on. And I think Sergio Romero stayed there too long because for some reason there's an obsession with De Gea being the better goalkeeper. He's mistake prone. His best form has deserted him, and there's clearly an issue with that player. I think Romero's gone. He's moved on. Sergio Romero is no longer a Man United goalkeeper. I can definitely tell you that for a fact. Sergio Romero, I think he's playing for another Premier League club now. Sergio Romero, he has moved on. He's no longer at Man United. Sergio Romero. Let's have a look at him. Oh no, he is still there. Wow. Okay, I thought he'd moved on. Well, he's 33, is Sergio Romero. Unless he's out on loan. I swear he was out on loan. I know he's had his injury problems. But he's an international level goalkeeper. This is why I can't fathom him staying at a club that he's not getting the game time. And this is what's bizarre. He's played more times for Argentina, right? Since 2009, as the starting goalkeeper, he's played 96 games for Argentina. Manchester United, he's played 7 times. Monaco, he played 3 times on loan. He played 71 times for Sampdoria and 90 times for AZ Alkmaar. So he's played more games for Argentina than he has done for any club. I'm sorry, I think that is ridiculous. AZ Alkmaar and Sampdoria, yeah, he's a starter. But since 2015, he's played a grand total of 10 club games. Since then, that for me is ridiculous. For an international level goalkeeper to play only 10 club games in 5 years is absolutely ridiculous. I think they've really. It's great that a club's got good squad depth in a position. That is very important. This season's going to test that squad depth because it's a bit more of a condensed season with the same amount of games. You're going to see Romero and Henderson get games off De Gea. If there is a COVID outbreak, or the fact they've got Lee Grant there as well really is a stumper. That means you've got 4 goalkeepers who are all at various points who are starters. I know Lee Grant's near the end of his career and he's a lot older, but you've basically got there 4 goalkeepers who will be the number 1 choice for another club. 4. You've got 4 number 1s at a club. That is, in my mind, ridiculous. Sergio Romero, you put him in any other Premier League or Championship team, he's a starter. You put him in the Bundesliga, La Liga, Serie A, he's a starter. You've seen this. AZ Alkmaar in the Eredivisie, and in Serie A, he was number 1. Lee Grant, while he's older, at Championship level, he's a starter and a pretty solid number 2. For any other Premier League club, he's an emergency starter. If you have, let's say, an injury and you've got to put a goalkeeper in for 3 months, it's in between transfer windows, and you've got to shove him in, he can do it. If you've got Henderson, Sheffield United, there's a reason why he got that number 1 role at Sheffield United. De Gea has to look over his shoulder and go, I've got 3 number 1s vying for my jersey right now. All of them are possibly, Lee Grant notwithstanding, Henderson, Romero are probably better goalkeepers right now. Right now. I think if you're Henderson and you're Romero, you've got to look at your options and go, do I really want to stay here long term? Because all that is there is you've got 1 goalkeeper who wants out in Romero. You've got Henderson, who obviously has been used to being a number 1 last season with Sheffield United. Lee Grant is obviously near the end of his career, but has had a pretty solid career. He's a professional. I think he's there for the experience with younger guys around the squad and to, in training, be a good training partner for the other goalkeepers. And you've got De Gea, whose confidence is shot, who's making really basic errors that a goalkeeper of his standard, who has played at his level, should not be making. So Man United have got themselves in a very tricky position where they've got 4 goalkeepers on the books, of which at least 1, possibly 2, will not be there next season. And there's been a debate about De Gea and his future for a couple of years. Romero, I think his talents are being wasted. His talents are being wasted. I think you could argue Sergio Romero, is better suited going elsewhere. I really think you could argue that. But it is what it is. I mean, I've just got to. But it is what it is. I mean, the fact that not only does one of your players want to leave the club, he wants to leave for a major rival. And people go, "Oh, Everton Man United is not really rivalry." It bloody is. You look at the history of the two clubs. That's a rivalry. Maybe not on the same level as Liverpool Man United. That's a rivalry, and he wants to go, you know, to a local rival. Tells you that he wants to stay in the area he's living in. He's happy where he's living in England. He's happy, living in the northwest. He wants to move without having to move his family, because you think about it. He's set down roots here now. He lives here. He's been here for 5 years. But to play that few games in that time, it makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me at all that you would have a player of his standard and barely play. The World Cup qualifiers, we've got to get the Euros out of the way. We don't even know what format the World Cup qualifiers will take. I think the Euros may have some bearing on the World Cup qualifiers because of the condensed season that we're going to have, and the fact you won't have a full 2-year window between tournaments. You're only going to have a year. And the fact that the World Cup is taking at a different time of year, taking place in Qatar, I think the format may change. I think you may not see any Nations League games. I think they may go on where teams finish in the Euros out of the European qualification pools going forward. I think they may actually have to completely change the format, because that's going to be another international break. That's going to put more pressure on club managers to go, hang on a second, our players are playing too much. And there's always the debate about playing too many games. So the fact that the World Cup is taking place at a different time of the year anyway, and we have a lesser gap between tournaments, because normally you have the Confederations Cup is the next tournament after the Euros. You would have the Confederations Cup, you would also have the Africa Cup of Nations, and all the other regional international tournaments. It's going to be interesting. I think when you're playing a team that's going to park the bus, or a team that's going to come up more defensively, the best way, I think, to beat a very defensive team is to pass and move quickly. Don't dwell on possession. It doesn't matter if it's rugby union, where it's a very defence-minded, okay, you can go phase after phase where it's going to knock you back and tackle. Doesn't matter if it's ice hockey. Doesn't matter if it's rugby league. Doesn't matter. It's football, especially a sport like football or field hockey. If you've got a more defensively, because field hockey is actually quite similar to football in this sense. If you've got a very defensively minded team, and their primary goal is what we call the long pass escape, not the long ball, the long pass escape, where they have a guy up the field, obviously staying on side, because this is where, again, field hockey, ice hockey, and football are very, very similar. There's an offside line. There's a point where if you're past that, you're offside. There are offside rules. If you've got a team which is basically absorbing pressure, they're playing a very defensive-minded tactics where they're trying to shut down the possession, try and suffocate the play, break it up, niggly fouls, for example, in football or field hockey, penalties or borderline hits in ice hockey where you're just trying to disrupt play, niggly challenges, sometimes big physical challenges if you talk about other teams like rugby, and you're trying to disrupt the ball flow, you're trying to slow down things in the tackle area or the ruck area in rugby and things like that. It can be frustrating for that attacking-minded team. Very frustrating. Certain teams like things broken up and bitty and gnarly and disruptive because there's no flow for the opposition. You will look at your opposition, right? You look at your opposition and go, right, this team is very speed-orientated, attack-orientated, but not overly physical. The team will look at that in their tape sessions, their pre-match discussions where the coach and the attacking coach, the defensive coach go, like, this defender, he's very quick, but his spatial awareness ain't great. This attacker, he likes having possession come in on the inside and then change it on his outside foot or his outside backhand or whatever it is. This player likes coming down the middle. Defensively, this player can go wandering, doesn't mark up. They will look at all this. We're debating, obviously, Southgate's tactics. I have not watched any of the England games in the Nations League because I have Sky, first up. Secondly, I've not really watched England religiously since the World Cup. I'm not going to lie, I've watched the odd game here or there. I've watched the odd friendly, the odd qualifier. I haven't really watched England for a good couple of years religiously. So I can't comment on selections and tactics. I can't. I can only go by what the reports say in the media and the scoreline, stats. I go by stats. Now, what I find interesting is when England are coming up against a more defensively orientated team, and I saw this in Southgate's, I think it was against Lithuania in 2017. I think it was a qualifier, and they won 1-0, and I wasn't happy with the way England played, considering the speed and the pace we had on the field. It's on the channel. The video is on the channel. Didn't get a lot of views for some reason. But England were playing Lithuania back in 2017. I think it was actually a qualifier for the World Cup in 2018. It might have been a friendly. But they were playing against Lithuania, and the pace of the ball, it was so slow, it was predictable, it was ponderous. You're playing a team that's going to be physical. You're playing a team that's their tactics is counter-attack, and they're going to try and put the ball over the top and try and catch the defenders high up the pitch trying to play the offside trap, or they're going to try and get England to turn the ball over high up and just try and ping the ball over whilst keeping the attacking player on side before the halfway line and try and catch them on a surprise counter attack rather than a planned counter attack. And they're going to try and tackle England out of the game. England are best when they work on the counter attack at pace. If they have to come up against a defensively minded team, the best way to do it is pass and move the ball quickly. Move those defenders around. Don't worry. I mean, the game against the Czech Republic, I believe. Well, I think we won 7-1 or 7. I can't remember. That was one of the last games I watched in the qualifiers. They were playing against a team that was physical and defensively minded, and they tore them to pieces. You know why? Because they moved and attacked the ball quickly. They moved into space. When the players without the ball ran into space, the players who are on the ball are looking for options all the time. Sod the pass around the back, just get it into the midfield and get it to the creative players quickly. The defender's job in that case is to have the wing backs go up and create overlaps and then create another attacking option. The goals were brilliantly scored. Result was good. No argument there. No argument. But here's the thing: since 2018, Cahill's gone, Vardy's gone. Vardy likes that ball over the top, that other option on a counter attack. Where okay, there's a defensive minded team, we're not getting through this. Just lift the ball over the top, and he'll run in behind and he'll ping it. He'll be far more accurate shooting percentage wise than other attacking players. Sterling's very similar. Now Sterling gets a. I'm a bit confused with Sterling because he's got the pace. He has got the pace. It's his shooting percentage. Yes, he scores a lot of goals at Man City because they create a lot of chances. His shooting percentage at the top level isn't great. It's not great. Harry Kane doesn't have the pace to disrupt and go over the top, so he has to hold the ball up. When you're playing without a player like Jamie Vardy, where you've now lost him to international football because the manager is a dick, not gonna lie, I don't think Southgate is the right guy to be managing this England side. You've got because of Southgate's philosophy of let's go as young as possible and inexperienced as possible. You've lost two key senior players who could guide this team around him. Don't have to be wearing the captain's armband. Bear that in mind. You've got two really key senior players who have won Premier Leagues, put out there, played in big crunch games, who are not currently playing with this team when the core of the team is basically Spurs. It's Spurs based, or it was. A bunch of players who regularly come up short in the FA Cup, in the League Cup, in the Premier League, in the Champions League, and haven't won anything with silverware attached to it. That's another problem. There's a lack of trophies in that lineup. Excluding the Man City and Liverpool players, there is a lack of trophies there. That is coming back to haunt this side. It is. It is coming back to haunt this England side. There is a lack of winning mentality when it comes to club football. But we've got some great young exciting talent. When they get over that hump and they can get, say, oh, I've got a winners medal, which could have happened in 2018, that changes the complexity of the whole setup. The problem that I have is Harry Kane, you take him out of the side, the pace up front changes, the dynamic changes, and it's positive. Yes, I could very well see that argument. I think when you're looking at the England setup. And as I say, I haven't watched enough England games since 2018 to make a valid assessment on every single performance, because the Nations League and the qualifiers and the friendlies, there's been a lot of squad changes. There's a lot of rotation there as well, which I find really, really surprising. I do. Henderson in the midfield, while he's not the most talented player, he's the hardest worker England have. He gets a lot of flack, but I tell you now, he's a very hard-working box-to-box midfielder. Not the most skilled, not the most pacey, but he'll put 110% in, week out. There's a reason why he's a Premier League winning captain. There's a reason why he's won a Champions League. There's a reason why, obviously, Jurgen Klopp has given him the captain's armband at Liverpool. He's a leader. He works his backside off week in, week out. He does. I'm not disputing that. I'm not saying he's the best player in the world. He really isn't. He's just one of those core energy guys you need in a team who's gnarly, can do the tackles, break up the play, lead the guys up and down the field. You need that. Every team needs that. To win on pure youth and exuberance and skill alone, you're not going to do it. You need that gnarly veteran. And that's basically he's a polite man's version of Roy Keane. He's a box-to-box midfielder who occasionally has that flash of brilliance, but for the most part, he's just there to be that box-to-box guy. He's a nice version of Robbie Savage. He's a better version of Robbie Savage than Roy Keane, I think. But he's that kind of guy. I don't think Henderson's gonna. I think Henderson's fitness does belie itself. I think when you have other players who don't have that same drive in your team, yeah, you're carrying a lot of dead weight. And I think that's what England's problem is. Kyle Walker is not an international level player. He's not even a Premier League level defender. The guy is a shambles. John Stones can't get in the Man City side. Maguire's having his own off and on field problems at Man United. Things aren't going well since he's left Leicester City. His career is sort of up and down. There's a lot of pressure upon him. He's not coping very well. England's defensive lineup is quite worrying. It is. I have concerns about Alexander-Arnold, injured, out. It's a shame. There are some good young players who, are injured. That's a problem. There are some other players who are really, really not great players. And I'm being honest, the goalkeeper situation is one. Pickford for me, I've never rated Pickford as a solid goalkeeper. I really haven't. He's got a really, really, really poor temperament. He doesn't command his box when coming for crosses, be it catching or punching the ball. I don't care as long as the ball stays out the net. End of. I have Pickford always. I'm always hand in mouth, hands over eyes with Jordan Pickford going for the ball. I have my concerns about his capabilities under the high ball, under the cross. His size has nothing to do with it. It's his error proneness, and he's a bit flappy. I think Pope, Heaton, and Henderson are better goalkeepers. That's personal opinion. Having in the build-up to the 2018 World Cup, and having watched the amount of football I did in that build-up, and watching every England game that I could, apart from obviously the Nations League games that obviously Sky I'm not a big fan of, but watching all the qualifiers, watching all the friendlies, watching the amount of football I did in the build-up to the 2018 World Cup, watching as many games as I did in that 2018 World Cup, which was pretty much nearly all of them, was never sold on Pickford. Yeah, the penalty shootout notwithstanding, as a shot stopper, he's brilliant. When it comes to making decisions where he's got to come off his line, come for crosses, block crosses, close down players when you've got to make yourself big. Well, look at the Virgil van Dijk situation. Basically rugby tackling him. That's not the first time he's done that either. He has a very awkward temperament. I mean, Eric Dyer. Yeah, some of these Tottenham players like Dele Alli, Eric Dyer, I think they've shot their bolt. I do. I'm not sure about Eric Dyer, whether they should try and convert into a defensive midfielder at both club and country. I'm not sold on Eric Dyer in the role that he's been told to play at club and international level. I'm not sure. I'm not sold on it. I'm not sure on it. When it comes to Dele Alli, that's another player with a hot-headed temperament who again injury prone, stake prone, and his focus wanders. Do I think England have much chance of winning the Rugby League World Cup? Whew, that's an interesting one. I think they do, but at the same time, I think we'll have to see what Australian side turns up. Having watched the NRL and seen how many injuries this was, I mean, the Australians now have depth at hooker. They now have more than one guy capable of captaining the team. That Australian forward pack is going to be very, very interesting next year. Will Boyd Cordner still be Australian captain? He's had a lot of injuries this season. Will Jake Friend get a shout out at hooker, considering again he's had some injuries this season? There's some young number nines coming through in Australia. There's some really good halves coming through as well. I think when it comes to the Rugby League World Cup, we have to see what Australian team takes the field and what Australian players are selected. Considering how Origin went this season, no one expected Queensland to win. Game 1 and Game 3, ironically, were very, very tight. Game 2 was a blowout in favour of New South Wales. Did Queensland deserve to win that? 2 tight games, 1 blowout game. Considering that New South Wales have won the previous 2. But again, I think injuries and refereeing played a part, and the disrupted season. I think it'll be interesting to see if the World Club Challenge goes ahead in February, March time. That'd be very, very interesting to note if that does go ahead, considering the situation that we currently have with the coronavirus. And Australia are actually dealing with the situation quite well and actually being in a very good position right now and not really having that bad a winter. Apart from the state of Victoria, Australia did really well out of this current first and second wave of COVID. It will be interesting to see if the World Club Challenge takes place first. That'd be the first thing to note. Second thing to note, and this is something that I think is going to be key, I think we're going to have a full NRL season. We also have to wait and see who is the 12th Super League team as well. On the side of internationals, I think the Rugby League World Cup will take place. They cannot afford to cancel it. I think they've changed the locations being used to make sure there's COVID secure bubbles. I think they're already putting that kind of in place. I think there's some planning there. But it will be interesting to see what Australian side takes the field this time next year, because I've also there's another State of Origin series to take place. You're going to have a full, fingers crossed, a full NRL schedule of, I think, is it 26 game season? I'm not mistaken. And I was 24 game season. They're going to have a full season plus a regular slotted State of Origin and possibly an Anzac Day test to take place. Players are going to retire and get injured. That's something else that has to be taken into consideration. The Boyd Cordner situation, he's had a lot of concussions. He got a concussion in Game 1 of State of Origin, and he was concussed 3 times this season playing for the Roosters. So Boyd Cordner has had 4 concussions since March. He's the Australian captain. He's also the Roosters and the New South Wales Blues captain. He's had 4 concussions. So long term, Boyd Cordner is going to be interesting. So it'll be interesting to see who they select in the halves. Will Daly Cherry Evans be the starting halfback? That's an interesting one. Will Cherry Evans be the number 7 for Australia? Will it be someone else? Because there's a lot of good young players coming through all at the same time. So there's that to bear in mind. Yes, Rugby League the RFL did have a small government loan earlier in the crisis. They may have had further financial assistance. I don't think that was the only loan they got, but they have had financial. The Rugby League did get some money. I'm going to go through all these questions. The Dyer situation we've discussed, I can see him being converted to a defensive midfielder just there for his tackling. On the RFL did receive, I think it was £16 million. There's a video up on the channel. I suggest you check that out. They received an emergency grant from the government because of the community aspect of the game, not because of the Super League getting any money. It was the grassroots that got the money, but they did get a loan. Clubs are still struggling. The Super League team, who do I think it should be? Well, the London Broncos were the last team to play in Super League before the Wolfpack. They've had a lot of Super League history, but then you could also argue the Toulouse Olympique as a second French team. But then if you want to try and reduce travel and keep that kind of risk out of it, of international travel, you've got Catalan in there. Could be a good rival game. You've got York. They've got a new stadium on the way. The Lee Centurions have been a Super League team. The Widnes Vikings have been a Super League team, although their finances are a bit weak. Bradford Bulls, they've got stadium issues. They won't be in the mix. Featherstone Rovers and Halifax. I personally would like to see the Broncos back. You need to grow the game in the south of England. This is a prime opportunity to do it. But I could also argue Toulouse because they've been consistently, consistently a solid side. In France, a lot of the French players go through Toulouse. They go on to Catalan and the French national side. So Toulouse or the Broncos, I wouldn't be disappointed. I prefer the Broncos, obviously, being a Broncos fan. But personally, I'm happy with either whoever gets selected. They've all got to put their case financially and when crowds are back in attendance. And I think the Broncos might get it on the on that basis that they had some good crowd numbers when they were last in the Super League. They were competitive. They've got a lot of history in the Super League and the Challenge Cup, much like Toulouse, to be fair, Challenge Cup. But they are got a good academy, players coming through. They develop players. They're a pretty solid setup. They now sort of have a home, you can call it that, at Trailfinders, or they need possibly their own stadium. They've moved stadiums multiple times, which is a problem. But there is a fan base in London. There's I think having a team in England's capital is a good thing. It'll be interesting to see if they are giving it or Toulouse. But I think the Super League are going to be a bit more wary of having an overseas team because of what happened with Toronto. And with Brexit coming as well, I know that's a political thing. I keep it off the channel. That will have an impact when it comes to Catalan, obviously, next season as well. Visas for players and travel restrictions. Toulouse, again, you could have a visa issue. So the Broncos, I think, would be the safe bet. Toulouse would be the form bet if you're going by how the team have improved to where the league player was suspended, they were top of the league. You've got York, you've got Featherstone, you've got the Sheffield Eagles as well. They won the Challenge Cup in my lifetime. And they're a pretty solid outfit. And Sheffield is a sportsman city with university connections. And Sheffield is one of the economic hubs of the North. So you've got the Sheffield Eagles in the debate as well. York just got a new stadium, which was meant to be built for the Rugby League World Cup, but they've got this new stadium, a new facility. So they've had some backing. And Halifax, who I think the only way Halifax would ever get back in the Super League is if that stadium gets redeveloped or they get a new stadium long term. If we were to go, right, there's no relegation, we're putting the license up for tender, team gets relegated, team from the Championship, you have to put a proposal forward to be the next team. It's either that or they expand the Super League to 14 teams. That's something they could consider doing. The NRL is a 16-team competition. There's a reason for that. They don't play the Challenge Cup. They just have the NRL and State of Origin. This is why the Super League is a small league, because you've got those Challenge Cup games in there. Whether York could put up any stiff resistance, I think the other teams that I've mentioned possibly have a better foundation to be more competitive. The Broncos and the Toulouse, I think, would possibly survive a couple of seasons in the Super League, and other teams like Wakefield Trinity Wildcats, for example, get relegated. Hull KR could fall afoul. So I think the Broncos have proven that they can be competitive in the Super League, make Challenge Cup finals, actually be a pretty solid Super League side. Toulouse, they've got, I think, a good foundation. They play in Rugby League's heartland in France. But have they got the depth to take that next step? Have they got the development of players to take the next step? But that could be interesting, having a second French team, building on the success of Catalan. And they have had history in the Challenge Cup by going to the semi-final stage and being very, very competitive. But the Sheffield Eagles, for me, or Featherstone being one of the founding clubs of Rugby League, I think it's one of the oldest clubs with links to the RFL. It would be nice to see Featherstone back. Bradford, Odsal, they're now playing in Dewsbury. They're ground sharing at the moment, the Bradford Bulls. They're not playing at Odsal at the moment. There's issues financially with Bradford as well. They've, I think, had 5 administrations in 15 years. They're not good financially. That's a concern, considering that teams like Widnes and Leigh Centurions have had their own money problems as well. It would be a concern having the Bradford Bulls in there because of their financial situation pre-COVID, not including COVID, pre-COVID. That, in my mind, would be a big no-no from the Super League. But I think the way they've got to reform how the league structure works. The fact that teams can go, we can veto this team being in the league. What they've done to Toronto, but the Toronto, I mean, the Ottawa Aces have said we're not going to come into the English rugby league system until 2022. The fact that I don't think Toronto actually have a team to put on the field next season in any league, be it Championship or League One, tells you I think the Ottawa Aces is going to be the same situation in 2022. The fact they deferred a year tells you about the situation in Canada and player recruitment. So while Toronto may have got loads of people into the sport, the disaster that the Toronto team was tells you all you need to know. I think the issue with visas, with travel problems, with the money issue, money was a massive problem, and travel would have killed them financially. I think the issues with the Bradford Bulls and them being the 12th team is their finances. Yes, they've got a great supporter base. Yes, they're a historically successful club. The money side of it and the cash crisis that Bradford have and the ownership issues will count against them. And their stadium, they don't have a stadium. They're actually sharing at Dewsbury Rugby League Club. So they've had to basically go to I think an amateur club or Dewsbury. I think Dewsbury might be semi-pro. They've had to go to a club in the league below and say, "Can we share your facilities, please?" So they're not Super League level facilities they're using. Whereas Trailflyers with the Broncos, okay, it's a smaller stadium, but it's a decent facility. The Leigh Centurions at the Lee Valley Park, it's a modern facility. Widnes Vikings playing in a modern facility. York got a new stadium. The Sheffield Eagles having a solid foundation and being a former Challenge Cup winner and playing, I think, in the top division at various points. Featherstone, historical club, they have better financial backing. They're more financially secure. And a lot of these clubs, like the Broncos, Trailflyers is actually a pretty modern facility. It's just a small stadium. No, because they are having issues with the Odsal situation. Now, the stadium is in a real poor state of repair. The pitch is not great. And I was watching the Challenge Cup. I think it was back in early March, late February, and Bradford were playing, and that pitch was just terrible. I'm not lying; the pitch was shocking. I also watched the season before. The quality of the pitch was it was a bog. It's a different. Okay, I don't mind a muddy pitch, but when the pitch is basically on what I would describe as the Somme, Passchendaele 1917, World War One vintage bog, that is a problem. While it and you can't sell that product to an international audience. Simple. The reason why the Super League and Rugby League in general, I mean, okay, Australia, they can sell the NRL to the US market. Super League, they tried to sell it to the Canadian market with Toronto. It didn't work because Toronto have now gone out of the league. But when you're trying to sell a product to a country or an audience that expects the highest standards of facilities and what the pitches look like and what the facilities look like and expect 21st century facilities because of their culture, and you've got a mud bath like that, you're not going to sell the product. This is why Major League Rugby in the US, they're using a lot of AstroTurf, multi-weather pitches, because it saves on the bogginess. It saves on the pitch turning to a morass. It means you can play in the depths of winter, in the snow, in wet conditions. Not all the pitches are Astro or 3 or 4G. A lot of them are grass as well, but the North American sports community are used to turf pitches, as they call them. We call them 3 or 4G Astro, but the plastic pitch debate. But I have noticed with the plastic pitch debate, more ankle and knee injuries, more contact injuries when it comes to the tackle. Players have complained about, skin complaints. Australia, I look at the quality of pitch in the NRL. I look at the quality pitch. Very rarely do you see a pitch cut up badly and turn into a muddy morass these days. There's one or two pitches that, like the SCG, for example, that have been question marks over the quality of pitch at the Sydney Cricket Ground, which is being used by the Roosters at the moment while their stadium, is being rebuilt. And yeah, question marks have been raised about the quality of the turf. It's not the worst pitch I've seen. You know, you could argue the quality of turf at Geo Stadium in Canberra is not the best. But the quality of facilities, I think the worst stadium has to be the Sea Eagles Stadium, because it actually is in a park. It isn't actually. It is classed as a public park. The Manly Warringah Sea Eagles, their stadium, Brookvale, the Brookvale Oval. When it's not match day or training day, it's classed as a public park. You can walk your dog, you can play frisbee, you can just walk on the pitch. That, I think, is the worst playing surface, and that does cut up badly when it rains. But not on the level of Odsal. If you want to talk about Bradford Bulls and their stadium situation, and you look at the Odsal pitch compared to Brookvale, Brookvale's a bad playing surface. There's no denying that. It's still far better than Odsal. It's a far better playing surface than Odsal. Bankwest, they had to relay the turf because there were complaints by teams of players getting injured, especially when they had. When it first opened, it was a bit slick. There's a lot of players slipping at Bankwest. It happens. But when we had the return to play earlier in the season from round 3, Bankwest was one of those hub stadiums where teams were like, "What? These teams are playing out of Bankwest. These teams are playing out of, Queensland or whatever it were." But let's say Suncorp. Suncorp cuts up quite badly. Bankwest, they had to relay the surface. So even though we're like envious of their facilities when it comes to the AFL and NRL, Bankwest, Brookvale, the SCG, and I think Geo Stadium, because Canberra can get below freezing. It's slightly higher up because it's in the Southern Alps and it's inland. So in winter, Canberra does get cold. You do get frost. You do get snow. Snow has fallen at Canberra Stadium because of the altitude it's at. It is in a mountain range. It does snow in parts of New South Wales and Victoria and South Australia because of the Southern Alps, and even parts of Queensland at altitude. There is snow. You'll get snow in Australia. People are like, "What, Australia? Snow?" Yeah, there is snow in the mountainous regions of New South Wales and the state of Victoria, and Canberra is in that mountainous region. It gets cold there. Not as cold as here. It gets cold. And the pitch does cut up at times. But the facilities are far better in Australia than here because there is more money. Yes, there is more money in the game. It doesn't mean that all the facilities are necessarily top notch, but there is more money in the game. Absolutely. They have a better TV deal. They still had to get government assistance to survive. Let's not forget that. There was still, in the midst of the crisis, Todd Greenberg, the CEO of the NRL, was basically sacked and replaced by Andrew Abdo, who's a South African by birth, which raised some eyebrows. And Peter V'landys, is also the head of New South Wales horse racing. They completely completed a overhaul of the governance of the game and got deals done to get the sport back. They managed to get the New Zealand Warriors and the Melbourne Storm to play games when they couldn't play games in New Zealand or in the state of Victoria because of lockdown restrictions and travel restrictions. They got things done. The plan is for next season that the Warriors again will be based in Australia, most likely in New South Wales or Queensland, to play games. So there is that to consider. They've had to do a lot of political wheeling and dealing because they've got a New Zealand-based team. This is the problem the Super League is going to face with Catalan, and if they allow Toulouse to be the 12th team, should there be further lockdown restrictions, and also issues with England, Great Britain's departure from the EU and travel restrictions. This is something that's going to be an issue. Is shit. Okay, let's say there's a real bad outbreak of COVID in France and Catalan can't play at home. What does the Super League do then? Let's say Toulouse and Catalan can't play home games because there's a COVID outbreak. Where would you put them in a bubble? how would you say to these guys, you're going to spend 6 months away from home playing and training in the UK, away from their families? The same debate was had with the Warriors and to a certain extent with the Melbourne Storm, although families were eventually bussed up to Queensland and parts of New South Wales where they were playing games and put in hotels and B&Bs and were looked after. But that situation where you've got a domestic league which has some overseas teams in it and restrictions are brought in, that's something, that needs to be considered. That is a problem, possibly. I didn't see the Stephen Kenny anti-English rant, but I have seen that type of motivational talk being given before. I've heard of it being given before. How that actually works to motivate a team, I'm willing to be open ended on that. I'm not saying that you can't motivate a team that way, but I'd be more okay. I personally, I've never had that kind of motivational talk where it's an anti this particular establishment or blank school. There is sometimes that team talk where they think they're better than us. That seems to work when you have a team that are taking you lightly. They have that entitlement. But when you start to get onto nationality, race, we've been down this road before, and it hasn't ended well for those involved. What am I looking for? I'm looking for something. I'm generally looking for something now. My mind is wandering. Aha, that's what I'm after. No, we've been down this road before. We've seen it backfire, where nationality or race or when you say race, I mean color of one's skin. Religion's been used before. Politics and sport can be a dangerous mix. When you bring in political terrorist organisations and likening it, that's dangerous. That shows how dangerous the impact is. So I'm going to try and make a cigarette out of other cigarettes now. This is just hobo. I've run out of tobacco and I've run out of fags, and so I'm going for the I've make a rock. They've got they've got English born talent in their team. I think that the danger is you have to look back in history, and we have seen these what I would call political motivated team talks and coaching talks done before, and it has had mixed results. We've seen it. Well, the 1978 Football World Cup is a prime example, where the military government in Argentina put a lot of emphasis on the World Cup being, very important that they had a positive World Cup and they won. And there were allegations of political interference and corruption with that World Cup. Now, Galtieri, I believe it was Galtieri, I'm not quite 100% certain, but went into the Argentina dressing room after they beat Peru. I believe it was Peru. I watched a documentary on this many years ago. I think it was back in 2006, before the Germany World Cup. But Galtieri went into the dressing room, and it didn't go down well. It became very divisive because some of these Argentinian players actually did end up playing in Europe, especially in England. Ozzy Ardiles, for example, and Ricky Villa. They ended up playing for Tottenham. And this is at a time in the build-up to the Falklands War. But there was definitely political statements made by the military dictators of Argentina during the '78 World Cup, where they went into the dressing room and had met the players and made political speeches. It didn't go down well. I forget which defender it was, but one of the Argentinian players had just come out the shower, and he heard that this guy from the military government, from the Argentinian government, was in the dressing room. So he lathered up his genitalia with one hand, soaked up his ballsack, and then he so do I. My surname is Irish. I've got Irish background, and I'm very, very proud of my Irish heritage, and very, very proud of my Scandinavian heritage as well. I've got some Scandinavian a lot of Scandinavian heritage as well. I'm very, very proud of the fact that I have Scandinavian and Irish heritage. Very proud of it. I have no doubt that we're living in a modern world where you look at the Australian national side. There are people who play rugby league for Australia who could represent Ireland, Italy, Lebanon, and they do in rugby league. I think when England fans sing of 10 German bombers in the air and the RAF from England shot them down, that isn't great. When Ireland and Scotland play, for example, the sectarian chanting. If let's say we've seen this before, the sectarian chanting and the sectarian side of things between Catholic and Protestant in not just the Old Firm but other games as well. Motherwell games have had it. Hibs Hearts is known for it as well. Sectarian chanting is another thing. One thing I do know about Argentinian football is I've seen a lot of documentaries, and Argentina is very, very much like Mediterranean Europe. And then when you get to Patagonia, it's very much like rural Yorkshire, rural Wales, the Lake District, the Peak District, because there's a lot of people actually originally came from the mining areas of Wales and the Peak District and the moors and went over there to farm. You will find a lot of people in Argentina with Welsh surnames. You will find a lot of people with surnames from Yorkshire, Lancashire, and Derbyshire living in Argentina. There's a lot of Germans who've gone over to Argentina. There's parts of the Andes region of Patagonia, Bariloche. If you watch the Top Gear special, a lot of people with German surnames. He went over not just after the Second World War, but before the Franco-Prussian War. A lot of Germans went over in the 1870s through to the 1960s. A lot of Germans. Gabriele Heinze, for example, ex-Argentinian Man United player of German heritage. Lionel Messi is of Italian heritage. One of the Argentinian players in 1986, Brown, English heritage. Obviously, he's passed away now. One of Maradona's teammates in 1986 was of English descent. What we call the New World, Latin America, there's a lot of them could play for, various countries other than Argentina or Brazil or Paraguay or Uruguay. But a lot of Italians. It's an interesting one. 60% of Argentinians are Italian, by the way, in descent. So you look at their names and you see, but they speak Spanish. With that, national language is Spanish. 60% of Argentinians speak Italian at home in some form. It's amazing. It's generally amazing. I think when you have a team speech like that and it backfires and you lose, which Ireland did, Pochettino is very, very interesting because he's adapted very well to the English game, being at Southampton and Tottenham as a manager. And the ironic thing, he never played in England. He played in Spain a lot of his career. Espanyol, he's well known as an Espanyol legend. Very interesting player. Very open-minded, not political at all. There has been in the past a lot of politics when it comes to South American sport. But without the Europeans, like the Italians, like the British, going over and introducing and bringing their ideas of how to play football, for example, and rugby union and polo, and rugby union wouldn't exist in Argentina if it wasn't for the English. Football would not have the same level of involvement if it wasn't for the English and the Italians going over there and setting up clubs. A lot of the early clubs in Buenos Aires and Rosario and River Plate are English founded. So without that involvement, you don't have the level of football being played and the rugby union being played in Argentina. It just wouldn't happen because of the European influences on Latin America that aren't Spanish but are from other European countries like Germany, like Italy, like Great Britain, like Ireland and Wales. But going over there and bringing the sports with them. You don't have it's an awkward one when it comes to Northern Ireland and Republic. You're allowed both passports, especially in the border areas. There is a rule where you are eligible for a passport. But then you look at Canadians. A lot of Canadians and Australians are eligible for a British passport and a French passport as well in Canada. It's historical stuff. It's true. The Stanley Cup is named after Lord Stanley, who was a member of the British House of Lords, who was Governor General of Canada, and his daughter helped grow the game as well, and hence why the Lady Byng is his daughter's name, because she married Lord Byng, and but I think when it comes to politics of sport, it gets quite nasty. It doesn't sit well with me. We've seen this on the Olympic level. We've seen this at World Championship level with various sporting backgrounds and events. I don't like it. I've never liked it, and a lot of sports stars don't particularly like it either. When there is politicalness put behind a sporting event, we've seen it at World Cups. We've seen it with South Africa and Zimbabwe, for example, being in the sporting wilderness for many years because of political boycotts. Where if you went up the Rebel Tour, England cricket tour, into apartheid South Africa, where, divided the nation. The '86 World Cup quarterfinal, England Argentina, there was a lot of unrest in the stands, and a lot of the fans who went over to Mexico or both countries were ex-military, and there's still that tension in the air. The trouble in Dublin in 1995 with the football riot, again, there was a political motivation to that, and unfortunately, when it comes to football violence, there's a right-wing element to it, and in certain countries, a left-wing element to it. You go to Hamburg, the Hamburg derby between St. Pauli and Hamburg SV, there is a political element to it. You go and look at Fiorentina playing against Livorno, for example, in Tuscany, there's a political element to it. Same with Lazio Roma, there is a very nasty political undercurrent to the ultras. You see this in Greece as well, and Turkey. There is a political element to some of the fan base, and it gets quite nasty and quite vicious. Same in France. You go to Corsica, you've got Bastia and Ajaccio. They're ultras. There is a very big political motivation with Corsican nationalism there. So when they play against teams like Marseille and Montpellier, who play on the south coast of France, there is a very nasty political undercurrent to it, which is stoked by political, what's happening with the political side of things. There is a nasty undercurrent to it. It's the same when teams like Nantes, Brittany, for example, there is a political undercurrent to it. Strasbourg, political undercurrent to it. But oh yeah, look, my Irish links go back to my I think great grandparents or grandparents. There is a link with both Catholic and Protestant on my father's side to Ireland. I have researched it. I've looked into it, and yes, there is a big political link there. It's a generic link as well. I'm happy to have Irish heritage, but I've also looked into my family history on my mum's side. There's Scandinavian heritage from Norway and Sweden in there as well. So, yeah, I find it kind of nasty. I mean, in theory, I could have also gone for my German nationality, being born there in the British Army base, and I could have got a German passport. I just had to do compulsory military service because I was born before, I think, 1995, in order to get my citizenship. If I was born in '96, for example, I wouldn't have to do compulsory military service, but I could still claim German citizenship. The rules have changed. So in theory, yes, I could obviously, if I want to become a citizen of Germany, learn German and apply for a German passport and do compulsory military service because I'm under the age of 40. And I'm still actually in that age group. In theory, I think the rules have changed now because I've been outside Germany for so long, but in theory, yes. I don't like it when there's that political element. We're seeing it in football selection with several players. Declan Rice, for example, is a prime example of a player who switched allegiance, and that's not gone down well. And the debate in Ireland about him switching allegiance as well hasn't gone down well because they are the ones who put the effort in developing him and all that. Um, look, I mean, the selection rules, and we had this debate on the last live stream, and we had the questions raised about international selection policy and how it needs to be looked at. And you could argue the same with Diego Costa with Brazil and Spain. That he's a divisive figure in Spanish circles and Brazilian circles. Just look at the World Cup in Brazil in 2014. Didn't sit well. He was booed a lot by Brazilian fans, and some Spanish fans haven't warmed to him. He's a very good striker, by the way. But he's a divisive character. He played games for Brazil and has now played for Spain. There's a 3-cap rule, I believe. I think once you play one game for a country, that should be it. And we've had England have lost out on players who've decided to choose countries of birth or countries of their parents' origin, who would have been pretty solid additions to the England side. But then you look at French rugby union and the amount of overseas-born players who've only got residency and now in the team. The difference between Northern Ireland, Wales, and Scotland and the Republic is they're still part of the United Kingdom. You have a British passport. When it comes to the Republic of Ireland, it gets a bit more complex because of the political situation between North and South, with the Good Friday Agreement, with the fact that there's a lot of Irish players who were born in this country, but one or both their parents are Irish. Hence why they choose the Irish setup, which is nothing. I've got nothing against them doing that. Kevin Kilbane's a prime example. Born and raised in Liverpool, both parents Irish. Chooses to play for Ireland. Could have easily played for England. Easily. Chose to play for Ireland. Ryan Giggs could have been an English player. And this is the debate. It was his mother was Welsh. His dad was English. Could have played for England. Chose to play for Wales. Again, I have no problem with that. That's how the selection rules work. I wouldn't say it's a bit weird that Northern Ireland have a football team. They have their own domestic league. There is a Northern Ireland League. It is a domestic. I mean, Glentoran, for example, I've got a programme from 1977. Northern Ireland has its own domestic league structure, like Scotland and like Wales. It does have its own league structure, so I have no issue with that at all. That they have. I have no issue with that. I have no problem with Kilbane or Jason McAteer. Personally, I remember watching them obviously play, and especially McAteer play for Liverpool. Another one with born and raised in this country, parents Irish, born in Liverpool, could have easily played for England. I think Kilbane was born in the Midlands, but I know Kilbane, both his parents were Irish, and Jason McAteer, both his parents were Irish. I've seen them interviewed, and the Kilbane situation is interesting. Kevin Kilbane and Jason McAteer are very interesting. I've seen them interviewed. Now, Kevin Kilbane's got a very thick Scouse accent. Jason McAteer's already got a very thick Scouse accent. Jason McAteer, at his peak when he was playing at Liverpool, was a brilliant player, very underrated. Same with McManaman. McManaman could play for Scotland and Ireland because of his heritage, but that's another weird thing as well. But Jason McAteer, there was a debate very similar to Declan Rice about choosing which country to play for. Born and raised in Liverpool, bearing this in mind. And very early on, he went with the Ireland setup under Jack Charlton. He went, this is the setup for me, with Charlton and then Mick McCarthy. I'm going down this route. I'm sticking with this route from a young age. He could have easily played for England, easily got into that midfield. Jason McAteer could have quite easily been an England regular. Chose to be an Irish player. I have no problem with that. Matty Holland, ex-Charlton captain, back in the day when Charlton first got in the Premier League. Matty Holland. Again, English, as in born in this country, born and bred, parents Irish, or one of his parents was Irish. And again, England lost out on a solid player in Matty Holland, partly because he wasn't playing at a fashionable club. You notice this with English selection, but he could have played for England. He chose to play for Ireland all the way through the age groups as well. England lost out because at the time of England selection, when you're looking at McAteer and you're looking at Matty Holland, who are Irish legends, by the way, when it comes to their international side and the history of the game in Ireland. Both born and bred in this country. Both went to the parents' heritage all the way through. All the way through. Declan Rice situation is he played youth level for one and then switches allegiance to the other. And you look at his social media accounts, that has gone down like a sack of shit. Hasn't gone down well. With some of the things he posted on social media and some of the things he stated in interviews, with some very political motivated stuff in there, and it didn't go down well. Now, long term, could we look back on the Declan Rice situation and go, well, the selection rules need to be changed? He's played youth level. There's that young lad playing in I think for Dortmund, and there's a debate over, should he play for Germany? Should he play for England? He's playing at Munich, I believe. It's an interesting one. On the England's best centre back. I'm not sure on England's best centre back right now. I think losing Gary Cahill from the England setup is a big blow for the experience that he brings. I think England's defence is their weakness. I generally think England's defence going forward, Pickford notwithstanding in goal, but I think Southgate's got a problem. The team ain't great defensively. He's always had that problem. Lewis Dunk, there has been question. I mean, there's some of the, Dunk has been mentioned before as a good, solid centre back who deserves a bit more time. Issue is, if you look at Leicester, got Wes Morgan, right? He's not English. He's chosen to play for another nation. I think he's chosen to play for Grenada, I think, one of the Caribbean nations. Wes Morgan has been lost to England again, very similar to other players like Jason Roberts, who's played for Blackburn and other teams in the Premier League, played for Grenada as well. Had he been developed as an English player and the youth development system and him come through a bigger club, for example, could have quite easily, obviously, played for England. So I think, you're looking at it. You've got, you've had players like Sol Campbell, Rio Ferdinand, John Terry, Cahill to a point, very dominant centre backs. We don't have that dominant centre back. I think Lewis Dunk hasn't had the experience at international level, which is a massive concern. Solid player, very solid player. But, he's not getting selected by England for a reason. This is on Southgate. He's lost Gary Cahill as that experienced, solid centre-back because of his age. Cahill, I think, in my mind, still has a lot to give to the game. Jamie Vardy, another one. Okay, he's not a centre-back, but he's an experienced player that Southgate's philosophy, let's go as young as possible, it's not working. Because if you've got Henderson in midfield being the only one who really does just chugs along all day, and we can debate, Henderson, he's not the best player. No, he isn't. He's the best leader we have. He's better than Harry Kane every day of the week. I would rather have Henderson as England captain with Cahill still in the back four or back five, depending how you want to set up. Because they're two players that are going to get effort from. You're going to get effort. Effort sometimes outweighs skill and guile and speed. If you've got effort, you've got drive, in your leadership group, you've got experience there, you'll win games and you'll win tournaments. I think this is the problem. Players don't get recognised. Yeah, you play for an unfashionable club. And this is where Kilbane chose Ireland, and this is where Jason McAteer, he came through the Liverpool system, and he could have played for England alongside Jamie Carragher and Steven Gerrard for the England team. And he chose McManaman, for example, and he chose the Irish route, and he did rather well playing for Ireland. Would I say if you play for Ireland, you have a longer career internationally? Probably not. I wouldn't go that way. Kevin Walters, another one. He's played for Stoke. Feisty, battling forward player. Not not banging loads of goals, but he's feisty, energy player, box to box. He will track back. Kevin Walters. You could play him in midfield. Again, another Scouser. But at the same time, Irish heritage, chose the Irish route. And this is the problem I think England have, is you've got players you can play for Hudson-Odoi. No, yeah, okay, he hasn't played for England, but there's players you can play for Ghana. There's players you can play for Victor Moses could have played for England, chose to play for Nigeria. Now, Victor Moses, as his career sort of tanked, but you get what I'm getting from here. There have been players that have come along that are born in this country, raised in this country, or have played their youth football in this country, where they come along at a very young age. We've seen this with several players who could have played for England and have chosen either the country of their birth, if they come here very, very young as a child, or the country of their parents' birth or grandparents' birth. I think the grandparent rule is what's in place, and are lost to the England setup. You could argue the same for the French. The amount of players who play through the French system who are now representing African countries and West Indian countries is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Mahrez, for example, could play for France. He chose to play for an African. Could play for France. My best English 11 for the Euros, I don't have one. I don't think, with the amount of chopping and changing Southgate's done and the lack of experienced players within that squad, is why I can't pick a best English 11. I would have Rashford in there. I would have Sterling in there, but Sterling needs a player to complement his pace. That's why I would have a Jamie Vardy, but he's said international retirement's my way for me. I want to focus on my league career. And that is fine. The problem is Southgate, as the manager, has forced Cahill and Vardy out, and you've only got Henderson as really a box-to-box player who can chug all day, who could be the leader. Because for me, Harry Kane isn't the leader up front. Putting it out there. I would not have Eric Dyer. I would not have Dele Alli. They've proven that they're too mistake-prone, and their temperament isn't great. I wouldn't have Pickford in goal, but then Henderson's got to become the starter. He's got to become the number one. He should have stayed at Sheffield United. I would say Sancho is showing great things at Dortmund. Grealish, well, there's a debate about in the media about, with on social media. Grealish is a club captain at Villa. He's one of the best creative players we have. Yes, he's had some off-field indiscretions, and you can say there's a few players who've done that in the last couple of years. But for me, Grealish is not quite the completed picture. But if you give him that leadership role and that key role in the side, being a creative force, my God, he can create things that other players can't. Saka, again, development for me. That's a personal thing. But at the same time, I haven't watched enough England games and enough league games in the last 2.5 years to really say this is my best starting 11, best squad. I would have Henderson or Pope, possibly Heaton if he can stay fit, over Pickford. Dunk should be in the England setup. I agree with that, but he needs to get more games before the Euros if you want to make him a centre-back. Bring Harry Cahill, and Southgate needs to reach out to Cahill and Vardy and get them back in the fold if England are to be successful. That's my personal opinion. Vardy and Cahill, I think, need to be involved with this England squad in order just to get this young team with that experience, because they've won Premier Leagues in there, just to get that extra experience and leadership that England are clearly lacking. Because Henderson, I think, is the true leader of this team, not Kane. Jordan Henderson is the true leader of that England squad, not Harry Kane. Harry Kane being captain is a absolute disaster. Is Harry Kane a good goal scorer? Yes. Is he a leader? No. No. Chilwell, you could argue a whole host of young players. The problem is there's a lack of experienced core there. The core is too young. There's a lack of experienced core. That back line, God, if Kyle Walker is the most experienced defender we have right now, we ain't going to win shit at tournament time. We know we're qualified. We ain't going to win shit. That Scotland side that we'll be playing in the group stage as the Euros will be so motivated to play against us. And if Kyle Walker is your senior defender, we're screwed. We're absolute. Just look at some of his performances for Man City in crucial knockout FA Cup games where he has cost them the game. John Stones has cost them the game. That game against Wigan a couple of years ago, they lose 1-0. For me, that was Walker, Stones, just, you could see the error coming before Kyle Walker even passes the ball. You knew something was going to go horribly, horribly wrong when the way Wigan were playing, there is a way to beat Man City: a high press. You put the right hand side of their defence under pressure, and now you've got Otamendi playing where Stones would normally play. But yeah, for me, the defence and the lack of senior players. When I say senior players, I mean players in their late 20s, early 30s. That's when you're at your peak, right? With the lack of Premiership winners in that squad. When I say Premiership winners, I mean guys who've done the full Premier League season, like a Jordan Henderson, like a Jamie Vardy, where they're first team regulars, where they're playing week in, week out, barring injury or suspension, and they are just chugging. The work rate of those players, if you take, I mean, Gary Cahill, okay, he's not the player he was, but you've lost that leading centre back, and I don't get where we're going to get that dominant centre back from. I don't. Dunk is a good player. From what I've seen of him play, he's a good player. But is he that dominant centre back? We don't have that Terry Butcher kind of player. We don't have that Rio Ferdinand type of player, though. That John Terry, Gary Cahill to a point. We don't have that centre back who doesn't mind, bleeding profusely and diving to stop the ball with his face. We don't have that. That's what's sorely missing from England's backline. The goalkeeping situation is even worse because as long as Pickford is number one, I have concerns about the defence in front of him not being good enough and the goalkeeper not commanding his box, which is going to create this lack of trust between the back four or back five or back three, depending on how Southgate wants to line up against whatever opposition. There's going to be clangers in there. Midfield and going forward, we're pretty good. I think that's where you could use a bit of assistance for Henderson, but where do you find it from? The Declan Rice situation, yes, you could play him as an emergency centre back, but is that a long-term position for him, considering that he can be a bit more of a creative player? There's too many defensive holding midfield players in the squad. You want Henderson in the squad as your leader, and for me, he should be captain. That's my personal opinion. From what I've seen of England games, Henderson's the one who's really shouting and screaming at players and driving players on, even though he's not the most skillful. And he has his critics. He plays a style of game that you need. Box-to-box midfielder who doesn't mind rolling his sleeves up. And back in the day would roll his socks down back in the 70s and 80s and put in challenges. Jordan Henderson is the true leader of this team. There's not a lot of other leaders around him. Grealish is growing into that responsibility at Villa now. And he's showing his potential. You need Grealish and Henderson in that midfield. Around them, you can build a core of players. You need a solid midfield base. But it's the back three or back five or back four that, for me, has me terrified. And the goalkeeping situation. It's all well and good with the players who can go forward. It's the players who, at the back, we haven't really got a settled back line. And the goalkeeper is horrendous, in my opinion. He's not an international level goalkeeper. There are too many areas in his game. And some of the bad games he has are, well, dreadful. There is no brilliant or average. It's either he'll have a good game and then three bad ones. The issue I have is, and you could have Cody in there. And I have no issue with that. It's the lack of international experience that he carries with him. If you're going to have him in there, you've got to start getting him caps now, getting him to have that relationship with a Grealish, with a Henderson, with a Kane, these other club captains who are in your side, the other leaders in your squad, and getting him to have that leadership core. You've got to get him in there now. You have to get him in there now long term. On the Kane side of things, he hasn't got the pace up front and he is becoming injury prone. You've seen a lot of injuries at Tottenham with him. And the Tottenham players constantly underperform. They melt down in big games. So again, you come back to Chilwell and things like that, and you look at Vardy, you look at Cahill, the experience that's lost. That's on Southgate. That's Southgate's policy is youth first. He hasn't got enough of a leadership core of senior players that have England teams in the past have had, where you've got that gnarly midfield. Where's your Paul Inces? Where's your Paul Scholes? Where's your Batties? Oh yeah, I remember Batty. Oh, he was a hard-nosed player playing for Leeds and Blackburn back in the day. Many a red card in him, but you haven't got that brutal midfielder, as I'll call it. You haven't got that gnarly midfielder who doesn't mind rolling the sleeves up and getting dirty. You haven't got your Terry Butcher, your John Terry at the back who will bleed for the team. You know, and yeah, I do have concerns about some of the squad depth. There is a lot of young players, and the Foden question about is Man City utilising his talent effectively and developing effectively. This is where I think Grealish has the advantage over Foden. He's been given the responsibility by Villa. He's the club captain at Villa. They could have easily sold him when things were going wrong. They could have easily, not worked out, and he could have moved on. They stuck with him. On the Harry Kane side of things, is he a good goal scorer? Yes. Is his game limited? Yes. I think he's a very two-dimensional player. There's no three dimension to him. There's not more to his game. He hasn't got the pace to track back. And in the modern game, you need to be play both halves. Who would I had? I would have had Vardy up there. I would have moved Sterling to the middle because of his pace, and I would have Rashford on the other wing. I would have Vardy on the right, Rashford on the left, and Sterling down the middle. That would be my perfect lineup for the World Cup a couple of years ago, and I would still have Vardy up front now. I would still have Jamie Vardy around that squad, not necessarily as a starter, but I would have him in the squad, and I would have him rotate with playing him down the middle, playing him on the right. Having Rashford in there is important because Rashford is a solid player. Grealish, you could play in a more attacking role as a point of a midfield. Henderson, deeper in the midfield. But then you need the midfield filling out a bit. And again, Sancho, I would have Sancho in there. But I would have Grealish and Sancho supporting Jordan Henderson. Jordan Henderson being the deep liar. Grealish and Sancho, you could flip them, either side. Have Rashford, possibly put Rashford in midfield. Kane and Sterling. Not Kane. Vardy and Sterling up front, but of course Vardy's internationally retired, and although he has hinted he may want to come back. But on the attacking side point, Harry Kane notwithstanding, there's a lot of pace in this team, and that's great. And Calvin Lewin's in there as well. Ings, yeah. Okay, there are some good young English players floating around. There's a good bit of depth there. Concern I have is at the back. Well, all we're talking about now is who would we have in the attacking lineup, up front and in the midfield. I think some of the midfield depth is lacking. Yes, you could have Chilwell in there, you could have Grealish, but then they're competing for the same side of the pitch. Sancho is clearly a must for me. Calvert-Lewin, another young, promising player, no doubt. But what we're talking about here is going forward. Defensively is where we're weak. And that's the concern, is under pressure. We play best on the counter-attack on a 4-3-3. There's no debate on that. Okay, there's no debate that we play best, 4-3-3. We show our best on a quick pace counter-attack. Defensively, though, I don't have no faith in that back line and no faith in the goalkeeper against the big teams. I think there's too many mistakes in that back line. There's a lack of consistency and fluidity in that back line. And the goalkeeper as the starter, as number one, Pickford, I'm not keen on him. I'm not sold at all. But again, I haven't watched enough of the Nations League games. I haven't watched enough of the friendlies and qualifiers over the last year to make a valid interpretation for me of what the England setup should be. But going what I saw in the World Cup in 2018 and going what I saw in some of the qualifiers for the World Cup before we got there under Southgate and some of the qualifiers for this Euros that I have seen, we look best if we are playing a possession game, playing the ball quick and move, none of this slow methodical. When we get into the possession and slow methodical, I fall asleep. I get concerned that we're just going to overplay the ball. When England play at pace and use the pace of a Sancho or a Sterling, I mean, Sterling's shooting percentages needs to improve massively, and it has done, but it still has a ways to go. But when Sterling's attacking the ball at pace, and you've got Sancho and Henderson with his box-to-box midfield play, because he will just run all day. He's not the quickest, he's not the most skillful, but he has that energy that then other players pick up of. When Henderson is having a quiet game, where he's not getting a lot of touches on the ball, he's not breaking up the play of the opposition. When Jordan Henderson has a quiet game, England struggle. He's the heartbeat of the team. the pace players, such as your Grealishes, your Sanchos, your Sterlings, your Rashfords, when they see Henderson putting 110% in, they play better. Now, right, okay. So when we're looking at, I've read the newspaper article, and me and my neighbour Adam is a Man United fan. He was concerned that it was Mason Greenwood, and we actually had an ongoing bet that it would be Kyle Walker. All we know is what I know is last week during the international break, a player was arrested. Now, Greenwood there's a lot of nasty speculation about Greenwood's state of mind. What we do know is he has had a friend who has passed away very, very recently. And there is a lot of media speculation and pressure being put upon a very, very, very young kid. Let's not kid ourselves, right? He's very young. He's playing one of the biggest clubs in not just the country, but the world when it comes to professional sport. There's a lot of media speculation. What I've read is that the player was in his 20s and was not, and it was most likely a player who did not feature internationally. Now, Mason Greenwood is only, and Hudson Odoi. Hudson Odoi has his own off-field dramas. And the incident happened last month. Now, Mason Greenwood has been in and out of, full. A lot going on there. Now, the scary thing is we have to be careful when it comes to speculation until the authorities publish the name, because for some reason the Daily Mail managed to get the scoop when no other broadcaster or media reporter could get their hands on it, which means there is police corruption there. If a investigation like this, where they can't name the individuals for legal reasons, yet somehow the Daily Mail has got hold of that identity of that suspect and all the victim, which they're not meant to do if the police have stated we can't release these details for legal reasons, that then could jeopardize any future case. If other newspapers and other websites, and including Sky Sports, BBC Sport, for example, the big mainstream media, and then you've got the various football websites, and then you've got the various independent journalists can't get hold of this name, but the Daily Mail, can. I feel sorry for and this is what was raised when Greg Clark resigned from the FA was, this is what actually cost Greg Clark his job, I think. Whereas when the FA were in front of the Parliamentary Select Committee, and this is where Greg Clark obviously made those racial and homophobic slurs, whether they're appropriate wording, whatever, cost him his job. What came out and what he was questioned was he sees what happens to players and coaches and fans and oh wow, Pepe was sent off for Arsenal after a headbutt. Wow, Everton beat Fulham. The lack of other media outlets, be it the big mainstream publications such as the newspapers, the TV channels, the more independent ones. So, I think when I did see it on the social media. I did. Mason Greenwood may have been arrested for another. It could have been done for drink driving. It could have been done for drunk and disorderly, a COVID breach. Anything could have happened. Mason Greenwood is a very troubled young man. He risks doing a Paul Gascoigne. But what I saw was, it's a player in the Manchester area, and his teammate Mendy is a Man City player. So the Manchester area has come true, if that is the case. But the fact that the Daily Mail got hold of this information when I was reading the Independent, caught offside, the Athletic. Yes, the Athletic is a great, and other sports websites and the mainstream websites for sport. The lack of a story. Other websites and newspapers were saying that reported in the Daily Mail per source. The Daily Mail said we have obtained this information, but we can't print it. But when the police are saying we can't release details, yet they've managed to leak it to a mainstream publication. Now, I'm not a big fan of the Daily Fail. I call it the Daily Fail for a reason. Is a concern that this could jeopardize any investigation. Contempt of court, perjury, fraud, corruption. It does raise questions about the police investigation. Now, the fact that his name's been banned around there is unfair. It is. I feel sorry for the crap he gets on social media. I feel sorry for all of them. I do. I think what we've seen is there were some people speculating it was Kyle Walker. There were some people speculating it was Mason Greenwood. If it is true that it is Mendy, who is ironically Greenwood, also from Manchester, but from a different team, that it has gone quiet. There was a lack of it; just burst into the scene, disappeared. Now, it could be quite likely that the social media companies have been told any posts relating with these trigger words, so names, shut it down. We've seen this before with investigations where trial by social media, and it has actually affected police proceedings, legal proceedings, not just in this country, but wider afield. A lot of the football players do live in Cheshire. Chester is the county town, be it from the Manchester clubs or the other clubs in the northwest, like Liverpool, Everton, Tranmere, Stockport County, even the lower league clubs. A lot of players live in Cheshire. The concern that I have is the police have leaked the details of this case to a rather disgusting publication in the Daily Mail. Look how they've smeared Marcus Rashford over buying his mum a house and investing in property. He's done a lot for charity. David Beckham's done a lot for charity. They praise him when he gets his MBE or OB or whatever it was. Marcus Rashford doing charity work. They praise him one week and they're ripping him an arsehole the next, and I find that disgusting. This is a newspaper that, when it comes to two different players of different backgrounds, so David Beckham from a working class background in Peckham, he's white. Marcus Rashford from a working class background in Manchester, black. David Beckham can do no wrong for his charity work and his services to the sport, and quite rightly, he's done great things on the field, and he set up his own football team off the field. He set up his own new team for the MLS. The thing is, the arrest happened on Wednesday. Mason Greenwood was arrested before Wednesday. If you read the article, the arrest happened, I think, late Wednesday, early Thursday. Mason Greenwood, if rumours are correct, was arrested the weekend before. So that already discounts him. Already. The issues that I think Greenwood is facing are personal, and mental health is an illness, right? Mental health problems are an illness. To be honest, I'm someone who's gone through the mental health process. The Mason Greenwood situation, I do feel sorry for the speculation around what's happening with him. And the club country debate and how Solskjaer is dealing with it, there could very well be personal issues there. Is Solskjaer trying to protect the player? Yes. Is there a better way of wording the situation and dealing with it? Quite possibly. Is it for me to comment on how an organisation looks after their employee? No. I think the social media aspect of things wasn't there when Solskjaer was playing 20 years ago. Solskjaer, was playing at the top level 20 years ago, and the way players' private lives are, and their antics. Yes, some of the players don't help themselves, but yeah, some of the players don't help themselves with some of their social media antics, like what happened in Iceland with Foden and Greenwood with the hotel breach. What happened during the height of lockdown with Kyle Walker and Moses Keane and Jack Grealish and some of their indiscretions. That didn't help the image of football players. But then you look at Ben Stokes and his punch up outside a Bristol nightclub in 2017. That was all over social media in seconds. The same with the Tompkins brothers at Wigan. That was all over social media in seconds. Cost them their jobs at Wigan Warriors. Sports stars can't get away with stuff they could get away with 20, 30 years ago. Best way I can describe that is just read Phil Tufnell's book on his guide to the Ashes. There's some stories in there that if they were to happen today, that player is not playing for a long time. He's getting suspended by club, country, whatever. Some of the antics that players have got up to in their downtime, or even on international and club duty. He does say at the beginning of the book what we got up to in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and those we can't get away with today. The sport has changed, but here's some of the funny little tidbits and interesting little tidbits of my time in cricket, plus other stories linked to cricket. I bought that book about the same time Ben Stokes got obviously arrested for his assault allegation, and I read the book cover to cover, and I read some of the antics that Phil Tufnell got up to on his Ashes tours, be it at home or over in Australia. You can't, do that anymore. Some of the antics, some of the drinking antics that they got up to, you can't get away with that anymore with social media. I think players still do it, but they keep getting caught. People have these things, camera phones. We didn't have these 20 years ago. We had a Nokia 3310, and it might come with the camera attachment, but the picture was so grainy, you could barely tell who it was. Getting up to no good. Now they can't do that. I think, yes, these younger players coming through are addicted to social media. We've seen this as well with the Fortnite, craze over the last couple of years, where a lot of players are addicted to their video games. To be fair, when I was their age, 18, 19, early 20s, I played a lot of Xbox. Not gonna lie, I played a lot of PlayStation, a lot of Xbox, and to be fair, yeah, I would have probably done the same thing. You are allowed to have some downtime and be like a normal human. These are human beings. These are normal people. Just because they play a sport doesn't mean they actually aren't human beings like the rest of us. The problem is the spotlight and the media speculation about every little time they're not playing, every time they're 75% of what you read in the mainstream media, 75% is crap. It's made up. It's speculation. It's not actual facts. I studied this at college. 75% of what the print media prints is speculation and hearsay, at best. And at worst, as we found out in a lot of publications, it's a shite. And they get taken to court and they have to issue an apology and pay out money when when they haven't reported the truth. So the Mason Greenwood thing, there's a lot of unfair speculation about what's going on, and Solskjaer and the club's statement, take that at face value. They're trying to protect the player. They're trying to shield him from what's going on with the mainstream media, and that includes the independent websites that Caught Offside, for example, and Away Day, Bible and Lad Bible. These what I call these new age internet websites that do actually have journalists working for them, who will then say, "Look, this is the story I've written. This is the article I've written. This is the photographs I've taken. Do you want to have that on your website?" And I go, "Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure." So when you've got publications like The Athletic, and when you've got these new, what I call new era mainstream media, where they've started out on social media basis, and then independent journalists want to work for them over the mainstream crap like the newspapers and the TV stations. The Mendy situation, really didn't think of that. Me and my neighbour Adam were going on, okay, it's an English Premier League player in his 20s. And we went for Kyle Walker. Turns out Kyle Walker's 30. Mason Greenwood lives with his mum. So we were trying to work out who it was, because when you have a story like that where it's an unnamed player, you just instantly you want to have a little investigation yourself. And we're two sports fans. We love our sport. I mean, and so we were having this debate about who it was. Now, what then later surfaced, and what I read in later articles, was it's assumed that he didn't play in the international break. So then I thought, should I start looking at all the international squads? I thought, that's going to take too long. I'm just going to let it lie, and then we'll wait and see what the police release. The fact that now there's a further speculation about another player, again, it's the media stuff. This is where I think Mason Greenwood's having problems off the field. He's a troubled teenager. I think I'm going to have to look how old Mason Greenwood is. He has clearly got a lot going on away from the game. It's interesting to know that Marcus Rashford does so well off the pitch, from a similar background, working class background, and a few years older, but he seems to be doing so much better. Mason Will John Greenwood. Here we go. He's still 19, so Mason Greenwood's 19 years old. Can't be him. So all those people speculating, if they read the article properly and read the media reports that were allowed to be printed because they haven't been pulled down, player in his 20s, Mason Greenwood's 19. So personal life. He was born in Bradford, Jamaican descent, and his sister is a track athlete. It doesn't specify his off-field drivers. Mason Greenwood. So Mason Greenwood's full name: Mason Will John Greenwood. There you go. He's 19 years old. So if you were looking at the press reports, player in his 20s, Mendy fits the bill. Mason Greenwood is not 20s. He's 19. The fact he may have been arrested days prior, the timeline wouldn't work. Because when the story broke on the Friday, the player had been arrested on the Thursday morning early hours, or Wednesday evening, depending on, which publication. The Daily Mail say it was I thought it was Kyle Walker. That was the speculation we were going with, or John Stones, because he hasn't been playing internationally. He hasn't played for Jesse Lingard. We were going from a player from the Manchester area. When then we started widening our bracket a little bit and saying, well, it's in their 20s. So I went mid-20s. I thought, well, let's just narrow the search down a little bit, because we're having speculation. This is what happens when stories like this break. You have speculation. It's like a game of Cluedo. And I forget which website it was, but there was a sports website who said, we don't want this to become a game of Cluedo and the unfair speculation. But from what we can gather from inside sources within the media world, it's a player in their 20s who most likely did not play international duty. So we went Kyle Walker. He's part of the international squad and he's in his 30s. So we discounted him. Mason Greenwood, 19, lives at home with mum. Discounted him, although he was still on the list. Then we started looking at other players who are not playing on international duty, who are Premier League players on contracts. And I went off a bit off field and thought, what happens if it's not an English player? We're assuming it's an English player in his 20s. So that's your John Stones, for example, right? If it is true that it is Mendy, and again, that's another rumour that's going on social media, which is deeply concerning if it is, and that's been leaked, then that would explain why, again, Guardiola, because apparently this incident happened about a month ago. This could explain why Guardiola is being a bit off with Foden with his breach at the hotel in Iceland, for example. This could explain a lot about the dynamics of that Man City dressing room. This could explain why their form hasn't been great this season in comparison to the last two seasons, while they've been a little bit indifferent in the start of their season. If there's off-field distractions like this with players misbehaving, this could explain a hell of a lot. It really could. If you've got players in your squad, now Mendy is not a key first-team player. He's a depth player. But if you've got players in your squad who are misbehaving or got allegations of misconduct or whatever it may be, that can explain a lot. It can. And yet, what happened with Luiz at training, that happens all the time. That incident that happened with the David Luiz training incident, that happens all the time. The crazy gang of '88 with Dennis Wise and Vinnie Jones and Fashanu and Laurie Sanchez, they regularly kicked the shit out of each other in training. They all hated each other. There were little cliques in the dressing room, still won the FA Cup in '88 and still were a solid top division side. You're not going to get with all your teammates. There seems to be a competitive edge to what's going on. Who's this? Oh, I've got to take this, so I'm going to have to end the stream there. So, goodbye for now. Hello. Not bad. Happy birthday.